Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, JJ Vance here, host of Operation GCD. Oh, there it is. And perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I will be your pilot and navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And I got a real barn burner on deck for y'all tonight. In fact, y'all probably have heard me discuss or mention the term Idaho Contra. And on that note, I'm going to unpack some of those ideas around these parapolitical events surrounding the state of Idaho, and perhaps even directly related to those Idaho 4 murders that Brian Kohberger just pled guilty for. So that case is a real boondoggle, and I have recently done a couple interviews on my current thoughts post-guilty plea myself and Kane B from The Purge last Fridays here on Operation GCD, and just yesterday on The Wicked Planet with Ron from New England and his co-host, Rick. So definitely recommend checking those out. Not going to discuss a lot about the murders tonight, but we are going to discuss with the guest Austin Wade Picard, a man with a lot of details on these matters relative to that Aryan compound up there in Hayden Lake, the matters of PatCon operations surrounding the 1990s events around Waco, OKC, some of their connections back up there to Idaho, and so on and so forth. And we see, a lot of the same parallels. We're going to be getting into that. It kind of touches base a little bit. We're going to pick up a little bit where we left off last Wednesdays in regards to the review of Lethal Weapon, because, these are the Bill Colby, the former CIA director's programs brought back to America: Gladio, Air America drug trafficking, and the Phoenix program serial killers. Well, these things are all presented in the plot line of Lethal Weapon. So recommend folks check that out if they missed last week. And then Operation GCD Thursdays. Another one of these Colby's queers, as I call them. Not a commentary on their sexual proclivities necessarily. There, just the odd and strange activities these folks have engaged in over the years, and the anomalous and strange and odd result it's had on society that we can't quite explain, right? And he's another one right there. Phoenix program himself, Michael Aquino. We were going over a lot of his own statements regarding his Phoenix program stuff and his mind wars last week relative to, some of his actual satanic activities, because the theory of that program is there was a satanic panic, organized and intentional, propaganda style, to deter away from the real world satanic ritual homicides, murders of humans and animals, and the satanic ritual abuse of children, ongoing still today, and ongoing enterprises, I would argue. And I documented that in recent episodes there on my Thursday show. And we are talking about those same ongoing enterprises here tonight with our guests, Austin Wade Picard. So, Austin Wade Picard, welcome back to Operation GCD, sir. Thanks for joining me again to get a little GCD.
Man, of course, brother. Thanks for having me on, honestly. It seems like there's too many layers to Iran Contra, obviously.
Way too many.
Right. And so they're never ending as far as just the resurfacing aspect of that covert operation, which, I believe never ended, because essentially it really serves as kind of a window into the playbook of the clandestine operations and how they're sort of conducted and financed also in the overall scope of the enterprise. And I think that's what Iran Contra, why it's so significant. It comes up so very often in terms of all of these scandals that we catch glimpses of, as far as that. Obviously, there are red flags surrounding most of those events, and instantly, at face value, it's difficult to buy the official narrative, and that's always been my goal, is to sort of find ways to bridge the gap and offer, some sort of credible avenue to alternative theories that very much seem far more plausible than what we're led to believe, right? And so that specifically is why, not only does Iran Contra come up in Ruby Ridge, Waco. I mean, you can point to Berry Seal. I mean, right? I've done a specific episode on Berry Seal, and that kind of provided another interesting aspect of just, again, like, this is a small old boys network, that I think
sure.
A lot of these assets are accumulated, and kind of so many of them end up inevitably hung out to dry, that is our glimpse, that is our window into the operational standpoint of many of these, right? Kind of like most pivotal moments in recent history that have seemed to have some sort of, like, in my mind, it points to the ultimate preordained outcome of where we find ourselves in this moment, with zero accountability, with public representatives who are...
Well, there you go. You read my mind, sir. You read my mind. It is the lack of accountability that I think is important, because as you mentioned all these details, and we'll unpack these further, and Barry Seal's an important character. And another one of Colby's queers. So, and not just he's famously known as the Mena, Arkansas guy, but we got some other details on that. But before we do, can you introduce your show there? And you're a hardworking man, and I enjoy a lot of the details that I catch when I do catch your show, sir. And you do a lot of Process Church and a lot of this cult investigation stuff that I certainly engage in myself, and I respect the work you do and some of the details you've uncovered as I try to, exchange some notes with you. We'll get into some of those new ones I sent you. I want to get some of your opinions on, because it is some of these new elements that we're trying to explain that I think, for many years have plagued even the conspiracy culture to try to explain these things. And I think we're getting closer to drawing smaller circles with some of the work you're doing as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And I think, well, I will say I created the Underclass podcast, and really that was in April of 2023, I believe. So that's when I finally took the plunge and officially created the show. But so it still feels very much in its infancy in many ways. But at the same time, I've been it really all I kind of got to this sort of ultimate inevitable kind of unavoidable climax where I had to essentially, direct my accumulated knowledge over time, because I was basically spinning off the planet at that point, and needed some sort of outlet that would provide me with an avenue of kind of surrounding myself with more like-minded individuals. So I felt less isolated in my ideas, and more than my ideas, my moral principles and ethical values, especially my core values that I attempt to, kind of identify and acknowledge, and in a disciplined way on a daily basis, fundamentally understand for myself. Because I think so many of us are kind of like suffering from the conditioning and rejecting the prior conditioning and sort of the propaganda in so many ways, right? That we kind of find ourselves just in a very interesting environment where again, I think it's more important than ever to find yourself in a place where you're surrounded by people who are actively exercising, ethical principles of some kind, because we're in this cycle of what seems to be obviously a strategic demoralization, right? Which is deliberate. And we spoke on this last night on Already Dead, how the very first stage of ideological subversion is demoralization. And so I think it's all by design. And that was primarily why I started the Underclass, was because I felt entirely disenfranchised. And, but just at a certain point, I was just desperate to find a way out of the current structured system. How could I find a way to opt out at every level possible, as often as I possibly could. And that,
dude, I mean, if I may interject, you're resonating with a lot of my thought process and a lot of these things. And when I kind of wrap a lot of those details into is, a lot of reasons why I started my podcast as well, there's only so many people I can, give ear beatings to in my real life that don't want to hear these details. Right. You know what I mean? I got to share them with somebody like-minded folks. Right. Exactly. So I like to describe it as we're in this era now of some sort of, it's the battle of good and evil is very present in our modern era.
Absolutely. A spiritual battle in a way, and anyway, that's definitely what inspired me, and it was a primary motivator, but yeah, I think, and I do. I think I encourage everyone who feels any similar way that there are more than enough seats at the table. It's just like you have to be willing enough to claim it and put in the effort, I think, more than anything, because I see so many people in this, landscape of alternative media that live by the law of abundance in so many ways. And that's something I admire and respect, because, Jose, he once told me when we started, basically when he was having me on at the beginning, when I started my show and just went on tinfoil hat, I just told him, I messaged him directly and said, man, thank you so much for having me on, brother. Like, it means the world to me just to be able to have these, these open-minded conversations, not be overly concerned with, obviously offending someone who will then close off their mind to any sort of just theoretical possibility of entertaining these ideas in any sort of real way. And he just told me, rising tide lifts all boats. And that was very similar to what, Sam has done for me, right? Sam Tripoli. Like, I love that man so much. Like, honestly, he's done a lot for me. He opened a lot of doors. He was the first one who essentially was just willing to have a conversation and offer me a platform. So yeah, those two I specifically love and admire. And so I just definitely want to say that, I've been nothing but rewarded ever since I took the plunge, and I think it's well worth it. So if anyone ever does, feel inspired to do so, yeah, man.
I'm gonna have to get you and Jonah on a Fridays at the same time. We'll do a roundtable on all of these topics, because Jonah there is a man with a lot of details on these same topics. In fact, he recently educated me on a couple weeks ago. Folks can check out that conversation. We went over some of these PatCon matters, with kind of unpacking the Bo Gritz relations to it. You know, I didn't realize that Bo Gritz was named in the PatCon matters as an undercover agent because we determined that through the matters of he's the one who settled that truce with Randy Weaver. So once again, we're back to Colby's boys, the Colby Quitters. Lucy Morningstar loves that title. It's patent pending there, Lucy.
That's so funny.
So, that's what we're talking about tonight, Austin Wade Picard, and I do appreciate your time and your expertise and knowledge in these matters, if you will. Not necessarily. I'm not an expert in anything, so I'm not lodging any allegations your way. So I see a lot of these things, these ongoing enterprises, if you will. You brought up Barry Seal. That's a great example. Maybe before I got a couple of videos to introduce what I'm kind of saying is the ongoing enterprises of these matters. A couple clips from Lethal Weapon, a couple clips from the Iran Contra hearing, that kind of thing. But
nice.
Since you already mentioned one of my favorite characters, let's start off with Barry Seal, sir.
Sounds good, buddy. I know
when we're saying these people are connected to everything, these people are connected to everything in this small little kind of group, right? This little network, right?
100%, man. And you know, when the Civil Air Patrol was just so hilarious that he was directly involved with David Ferry, right? Especially when you consider what David Ferry was up to, sending those boys to Central America and hypnotizing them and essentially. I believe David Ferry was a legitimate pedophile. I think he was out and out raping some of those boys while they're under hypnosis. And I think Lee Harvey Oswald was one of the primary candidates for that sort of sexual abuse, which makes a lot of sense if you're considering trauma-based mind control and how they utilize, through Project Monarch techniques, specifically kind of this sort of sexual trauma at a very young age. And essentially, I think prepubescent matters, which is very disgusting, but it definitely does. And it's something that I've unfortunately discovered over the course of my research. And but I will say, in terms of this interesting sort of story that connected indirectly to Barry Seal's connections to the Civil Air Patrol, he was it was so funny because he actually he crashed. I believe he crashed one of his teachers' planes, right? And it was very interesting when you look into this strange occurrence, because it looks like he took his buddies up into this single engine plane, right? And he's just doing these diabolical maneuvers and inevitably crashes in an open field. And it's very interesting at how it goes, but it turns out that there's all this litigation and his father ends up suing the individual who owned the plane, but he was a flight instructor that was essentially an aviator named I believe his name was Ed Dufford, and he basically had this he called Barry Seal, he said that boy was first cousin to a bird, I believe was the quote that he had, which I thought was very hilarious. Statement. Yeah, I know, but they claimed it.
If I may, Austin, we can introduce for folks who don't know who Barry Seal is. He was a major figure in the MENA drug trafficking, right? The Medellin cartel, which, again, this is a small network we go back to because when we're talking some of the cold activity associated with this network in the Medellin cartel, you have Bob Cocaine Evans, Mr. Hollywood Process Church himself there. And he's arrested with the head of the Medellin cartel in America, Karen Greenberger, in 1988 for the murder of Roy Radin.
That is
he's an unindicted co-conspirator, I should say. He's not arrested. He's an unindicted co-conspirator. He pleads the fifth in the arraignment hearing. And then Charles Manson's buddy, Ira Reiner, the district attorney, lets him off.
It's so hilarious that all of this just coalesces into honestly, for Roy Radin to be connected to Barry Seal is one of the funniest things that I've ever heard, because in terms of that, the Cotton Club murders and how really provides another angle into these, what I believe to be this very much a sinister enterprise that is international in scope. And I think it's far more well established, and the networking itself, you can clearly see with these usual suspects just resurfacing over time in each of these scandals, which is just, something that, Marion Petty's son also in the civil.
Are you kidding me, dude? I didn't know that. Are you kidding me, dude?
No, I didn't know that.
Me, dude?
If that's true,
thank you, Old Car Restoration. That's great. That's fantastic information.
Yeah,
because here's the deal. So I don't understand the dynamic of the Civil Air Patrol unit, but for this is 1955. Mm-hmm. So we see David Ferry, second from the left. He's the leader of this unit, the squadron leader of this unit, and we see Lee Harvey Oswald over here on the right. Now they would later meet up again in New Orleans after his Marine time in 1962, and these were the central figures in Jim Garrison's investigation into the murder, the plotting of the assassination of John F. Kennedy right there in New Orleans, or as they say down there, Nolans. So we now have Barry Seal also in the same unit at the same time. He's not pictured here. And now we have Marion Petty's son. So here's the thing I find very interesting here. So you have not only the details you're describing with these kind of MK Ultra programs, which I would assert these two gentlemen, Barry Seal and Lee Harvey, were born into. So Lee Harvey Oswald's second great grandfather was a major in the Georgia chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati in the Wars of 1776. The secret society that started America, the memberships passed down through paternal heritage, right? So It looks like Lee Harvey may have been that paternal heritage, right? And Barry Seal, his second great grandfather, or I'm sorry, disregard, his third great grandfather is a Captain William Seal from the North Carolina chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati. And on top of that, it gets even weirder because you look at who their cousins are. So Barry Seal's fourth cousin, Seal, is Jimmy Carter. And then you see Lee Harvey Oswald's third cousin, once removed, Oswald, is Teddy Roosevelt.
That is so fucking crazy.
We're dealing with smaller networks. You see what I'm saying? We're dealing with smaller networks when we realize the context of how all of these people get in this little Civil Air Patrol unit.
Right. Yeah. And if you consider the fact that maybe Lee Harvey Oswald was potentially like the consequential outcome of a potentially a Nazi breeding experiment, which I found very interesting, that was suggested as Marion David Petty, the game caller, founder of the Finders, right? Like,
he was driving generals around Fort Myer for his Air Force duty.
I know, right? I mentioned that as well, and the fact that his brother was involved, and then was a cop who was then shot and murdered while he was on active duty, which I found very interesting. That it seemed like you never know with these cases, and I haven't yet dug into that specifically, but I am curious, just considering the fact that so many, like, for example, some of the Son of Sam murders were legitimately targeted assassinations, you know what I'm saying, and all to sort of facilitate a cover up, but it was a layered symbolic execution as well. So it sort of fit this kind of interesting, this is where it's difficult to assess for myself which is true. Like, were they also leaning into, was this a deliberate attempt to misdirect the public? Or, and I think that it's layered in scope, and there are legitimate assets on the ground who most likely fall under the spell and legitimately buy into some of the occult principles that they practiced in the Son of Sam. But
for sure, you got to have some true believers, right? That's a good assessment.
Yeah, and
if we may visit this piece on Barry Seal before we move off of him, this is interesting because we're talking about these ongoing enterprises and how no one's held accountable, right? Mm-hmm. So we see Seal was a TWA pilot, right? And it ended in July 1972, which is an interesting time frame given the involvement of a lot of these things. That's button up to Watergate, right? When he was arrested for involvement in a conspiracy to smuggle a shipment of plastic explosives to Mexico using a DC-4.
I have that. Hey, man, I thought, but Tom Cruise, American made, they say it's cigars, man. He wanted a cheap thrill, buddy. That's so fucking funny. And by the way, what was crazy, the reason I mentioned that Ed Dufford, that flight instructor that was quoted saying that he was this uniquely talented aviator, basically, he also would later become the flight instructor for Muhammad Atta.
Come on, man.
The alleged Egyptian hijacker and a supposed ringleader of September 11th. which is just hilarious, but yeah, that is very strange. And then he gets this skywriting gig while he's in high school, and he owns like a small charter business while he's like legitimately 17 years old. So he was effectively, he was kind of a very interesting and motivated young person, right? And this is all leading up to, because it's interesting, this is directly after he was in the Civil Air Patrol, that he's kind of like already establishing himself in the form of what he could potentially, this is another thing that I think he was living under this sort of false constructed identity where he wasn't actually working under the cover of what they claim he was working, doing, as far as like, I believe he was running covert operations in terms of Vietnam at the time, like even when he was a young person, which is very interesting how that comes up. And it turns out that it looks like it was when he was 16, it was in 55, right? When he joined the Civil Air Patrol, as you said.
Yes, sir. I think it was December of 54.
Baton Rouge.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Baton Rouge.
Okay. And that's
not far from Lake Pontchartrain, where they were doing all that anti-Castro Cuban training, right?
That's exactly it, because that all came up with Jim Garrison's investigation there, which is very interesting because the joint training missions with the New Orleans unit was entirely controlled by David Ferry himself, who David Ferry. It's so crazy, the story of this John Odom, this classmate of Barry Seal. Have you ever heard this story? He talks about how.
Please tell.
So basically, while obviously Barry Seal met a 15-year-old, this is very crazy to me that the fact of the matter is that
Austin, this is all very crazy. All of these, it's like that's what I'm saying. We're piecing together a lot of details, drawing some smaller circles around here. It all seems pretty wild because we've all been sold a false narrative for so long.
Yep, 100%. And
these people don't know each other. That's always the Satanist claim, right? We don't know each other. Same thing with these spooks, and they operate within this national security umbrella, like Michael Aquino.
100%. And they say Barry Seal specifically knew and had met Lee Harvey Oswald, and that also Tosh Plumlee, who claims to have been one of Barry Seal's closest friends. He ran a lot of these covert operations as a pilot as well, and he came out to St. John Hunt, E. Howard Hunt's son, and he told him that Tosh Plumlee, he himself, and Barry Seal were actually the pilots who flew in the hit squads to Dallas that day, right? And that always it honestly it fit perfectly as far as
I was gonna say it jives, right? I mean, they all know each other.
Yeah, and I don't see why, because it basically he claimed the only reason that he was remaining silent was due to E. Howard Hunt, and so he said, if you tell me, I'll go public, basically, to E. Howard Hunt's son after Howard Hunt died. But yeah, so this classmate of Barry Seal's, his name was John Odom, and he says that one Friday evening while they're in high school, he got a call from Barry Seal. He said Barry asked him if he'd like to fly with him in the morning over to Lacombe. Is that how you would pronounce it? I'm not sure, but it's near in a little town on the North Shore across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans. And so he left about 5:30 a.m., flew over to the airport there. And when he got off the plane, there was a guy on the tarmac dressed all in black. They were black military fatigues, black boots, black beret. He was sitting in a director's chair, drilling a bunch of Civil Air Patrol cadets, all carrying the old M1 rifles, standing in formation in front of him. It was David Ferry. He was a captain in the Louisiana Civil Air Patrol. And Barry Odom goes on to say he had fake eyebrows, real weird, with one eyebrow turned up at a 45-degree angle. I laughed when I saw him, and Barry didn't like that and told me to stay by the plane or he wouldn't let me fly back with him to Baton Rouge. Odom then watches them confer, and he says that he sees Ferry point to this 50 or so wooden crates staged next to the tarmac. And on the way back to Baton Rouge, Barry tells Odom that basically that he's working for David Ferry, and he said he was CIA. And then he, of course, says that obviously Victor Marchetti, clearly all of his work whenever I was covering what was it? Search for the Manchurian Candidate. Isn't that the name of the book? Or what was the name of Marchetti's book? I'm trying to remember.
Right. That sounds right. Victor Marchetti.
I think that was it. Yeah, I believe so. But either way, he
major figure though, because we're drawing these smaller circles. You're describing all these activities around Ferry and Seal and JFK, and Marchetti again goes back to all this anti-Castro Cuban business, all this Bay of, as Tricky Dick said in the Watergate tapes, this whole Bay of Pigs thing when they're trying to pay off E. Howard Hunt. And when you're when you're talking about cover operations, E. Howard Hunt, the White House plumber, the guy who ran it, the CIA guy, right? He actually works for the Mormons at that time. Right?
Hey,
you know what I mean?
Of course, man. Yeah, it was Mullen and Company, which 100% Robert Mullen. Apparently, I believe he was the one who was directly associated with helping write some sort of historical. He had something to do with authoring the history of the Mormon Church at a certain point, which I found very interesting. And then they end up selling the Mullen and Company to the future governor of Utah.
Bob Bennett, his father was the current senator at that time.
Robert Bennett, that was it. Yeah. That was it. Yeah, it was Robert Bennett. I have a note there.
His nephew was my Mormon bishop in the 90s, my teenage years.
So crazy. I have so
the Bennett's are strong within the Mormon Church. Don't have no doubt there.
Oh, right. And man,
Bob Bennett was a Skull and Bones guy. You know that, right? Out of the Utah branch of the Skull and Bones.
Yeah, which by the way, this isn't anything new, right? Iran Contra, like all this.
Let's
think opium wars. What financed the old land barons that created and founded all the institutions, and you wonder why the long march through the Marxist, the Marxist march through the institutions, dude, they were designed to fail. Yale, Skull and Bones, what is it? The whatever in Key, I never can remember, but you know what I mean. It's just the
Allen Key now or something like that.
Yes, it's something like that, but I can't remember.
You're making some valid points. Again, that's what I'm that's the message I'm trying to convey when I'm talking about the occult genealogy of a lot of these topics. Occult, both in the practice of occult practices and occult as in hidden, right? Because again, we don't understand these aspects. So we look at Bill Colby's heritage. We find the same pattern of behavior. He's descended from a captain in the Massachusetts chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati, Captain Guy Colby, right?
Right.
And it's interesting because even past that, we see even more similarities because before that they hail from Essex during the time of the Salem witch trials, right here, Obadiah and Samuel Jr., right? Essex, late 1600s, right? So that's interesting because not only do we see Bill Colby probably being a member of the Society of the Cincinnati, right? Hereditary member, we also see other folks who have had major impact in the occult sense. So we see all this, kind of like we were pointing out before with Aquino, the satanic cult aspects to a lot of this network. Well, it kind of goes deeper to that in a longer history. I don't want to try to get into those details tonight, but what I do want to point out is Jack Parsons, Whiteside Parsons, aka Jack Parsons, his second or third, was a captain in the Massachusetts chapter of the Society of Cincinnati in the wars of 1776.
My God.
And that man's grandmother Parsons was a witch accused witch in the Salem witch trials, right?
So the Society of the Cincinnati came up whenever I did the Pilgrim Society and the Anglo-American establishment.
They started it.
Yeah, I was unaware until I kind of dove into the layers, behind this secret fraternal organization of powerful influence, and it was an extraordinary. Again, I didn't expect it. It was something that it was very unexpected. It's basically, common theme throughout the course of my research are these unexpected threads that seem to just continually tie back into each other, which is just like a fascinating experience, right? When you're on the path, and so
oh yes, sir. And that's a good point though with what you're pointing out there. If I may, just real quick, with the Pilgrim Society, like I said, it was started by, I believe, I was just looking it up. I don't recall the guy's name. He's a hereditary member of the society. I believe he was a U.S. senator out of Mississippi. So ever since the beginning of the Society of Cincinnati, which formed 3 months before America formed, right, in May of 1783 on Friday the 13th, America formed on September of 1783. So if you go to the society headquarters in D.C., they'll try to describe this otherwise. They don't want to make it sound like a military junta, right, wrong, or indifferent. But there's been a liberty faction and an anti-liberty faction, right? And these people, I argue, are part of this anti-liberty faction when you see these matters. And Henry Kissinger, old Cocaine Bob's buddy, was a big part of that Pilgrim Society.
Of course. And that's why, honestly, when you look at Le Circle and these strange, tie-ins to essentially all of these interesting occult organizations that, again, like they seem to be offshoots and chapters of each other that at the very least reinforce many of these similar ideas and philosophies and principles. And that's something
For
that
sure,
always
dude. Let's look at this though on that same note, if I may, sir. The Pilgrim Society connected to influential families in the U.S. such as the Astors Society family. They also have a member at the OG membership of the Process Church. They have an Astor there. We got the DuPonts. They're part of the French chapter of the Society of Cincinnati. E.I. DuPont was an original member. We got the Rockefellers. They were the Rockefellers. They're a member of they got membership in the New York chapter. I don't know about the Carnegies off the top of my brain hole. The Vanderbilts, yes, out of New York chapter, and the Morgans, yes, out of New York chapter. So, yeah,
it definitely. I let me pull up my Pilgrim Society notes because it's
Please
hilarious when you have you basically can there's this crazy list of the individuals who are actually involved, and this goes all the way back to, I think, the Pilgrims were responsible for the 24-hour news cycle. It's a really fascinating, Alan Dulles. You had everyone who is legitimate, Alexander Haig. You have so many different people who tie directly into this, and also extend to like the Anglo-Irish Vice Ring and these various, you have Sir Harry Britton and so many other people who are involved. But I think it's important to understand as well that you have like this sort of what was referred to as the sacred destiny, right? But it definitely seems as if there was this sort of like notion for an experiment, right? And what was called a city upon a hill, and what they effectively wanted to do is form the U.S., establish this sort of secular nation, and Dr. Corbeau, man. Hey man, we had some fun on Already Dead last night. It was
Dr. Corbeau is a man with many details, much like yourself, sir. He's always got some
very intelligent. Yeah, he's an extremely intelligent guy. I know whenever I was doing the morning stream all the time, it definitely he would provide a lot of details that I was unexpecting, or that was just, they weren't entirely unexpected, obviously, but yeah,
he's a wealth of knowledge specifically on cannibals, I've noticed as well, and I've had my dealings with cannibals myself, sir.
In what way?
I came face to face with a psychopathic, kid-diddling, cannibalistic, homicidal serial killer in Great Falls, Montana in 2001 in the Cascade County Jail. And then that same guy may or may not have served me human meat burger the previous summer at the local Hardee's where he worked. Yeah.
Oh my God, dude. That is insane. I can't, I don't know. I'm not surprised at all, though, because honestly, how often it's come up. I mean, you think of I always think of the Hand of Death, right? And
this guy fits right into that, sir. This guy fits right into that. I like where your head's at, because so the guy that this dude had tried to rape, murder, and eat 5 kids in Massachusetts, and they let him go to Montana. And then the judge that let him go, though, and then he gets out of the mental institution, and then 4 weeks later he does it again. And then they put him on probation and ship him off to his mother's house in Montana. But the reason why his mother lives in Montana is because his father worked at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana. That was my first assignment.
Oh my God.
So,
My God,
so he
man.
gets shipped up there, and then he just apparently just goes back to business as usual, right?
Right.
And the judge that let him out is the same judge that let Teddy Kennedy walk in the Chappaquiddick incident, which is a process church murder cover-up situation.
My God, man.
Yeah.
That is nuts. I know.
Oh, it's a wild tale. That's the legend of Nathaniel Bar Jonas, sir, right there. Folks should check that
Jesus.
one out.
Yeah, definitely.
I obviously muppetized him. That's not the real man. This man was pure evil. So
Yeah.
I got hemmed up on a Dewey, but I just did the wise maneuvers and just failed to comply with any tests. And the local sheriff's deputies got real butthurt about my lack of compliance. And then they handcuffed me to a bench right in front of this guy's plexiglass, Hannibal Lecter looking cell at like 3 in the morning or whatever. And I'm like 18 inches away from dude, you know what I mean? And like, there's just
Right.
like less in between. And I assure you that was pure evil in them eyes.
Oh my God, man. I know that I've heard it described where like people legitimately, they have like,
there you go, sir. Your home state of Arkansas with Dr. Corbeau with more fun facts about cannibals, as I told you.
wow. Stopped off in Arkansas first to set up a chapter of NAMBLA. My
There you
God, that is so fascinating. I mean, Paul Bonacci claims he was there for the founding of NAMBLA at I believe it was in Boston, and he claims that he was running, essentially helping distribute child porn internationally on behalf of some of these individuals, and NAMBLA was associated to the finders. I didn't realize that there was a document.
It has some of the same connections too.
Yeah, I didn't realize that there was a document that showed that members of NAMBLA who were suspected for murdering basically multiple people, but including a child, were essentially on the list as far as individuals who had purchased abducted children from John David Norman's Odyssey Foundation, and ties into this sort of pedophile underground network, which just fascinating stuff in itself, right? But
that's great notes, man. This is what we're talking about with these ongoing enterprises, right? But if I may circle us back to the Iran Contra topics, and specifically then segue into the Idaho Contra correlations and parallels, and some of the exact same money launderers from Iran Contra are in around the Idaho situation. So
definitely.
that is very fascinating when you consider these ongoing enterprises. And if I may start us off on that topic with a introduction from the man who ran the investigation from the Senate into Iran Contra, and he was the lead investigator also in Watergate for the Senate. Go figure.
Of course.
Senator Daniel Inouye. So when we talk about folks not being held accountable, this guy's kind of at the root of the knowledge and helping folks not be held accountable. So I just say that to in context of the man's statements, because, I see this kind of stuff around the interwebs a lot over the years, over the last 15 or so years. I've been kind of, interested in conspiracy culture before I even did a podcast, obviously, consuming podcasts, right? I'm sure much like yourself. And I see this, this trope of this Daniel Inouye speech about the secret army, right? Because that's what we're talking about, this black book operation involving the National Security Council. And that's what he talks about in his Iran Contra closing remarks. But he's not doing it to hold anyone accountable. This is like a soft disclosure kind of, look, we took care of things kind of, it's almost like a magic show, right? They have to mention the details. They have to put Oliver North in prison for a couple of years. G. Gordon Liddy, he goes to prison for a couple of years over the Watergate stuff. And then him and G. Gordon Liddy, all these guys, then they go on tours together, right? They're like, oh, we're friends now,
It's so
I'm obviously
ridiculous.
mixing up a couple of my characters there, but they do these ridiculous things.
I will say
that seems to be a pattern, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think G. Gordon Liddy definitely got set up to a certain extent and kind of hung out to dry at a certain level, was a little bit on the outside by the end of it. Although it's interesting because the way he was described was just kind of like this over emotional, extremely loyal, radical mentality, in terms of like he was claiming he would just go stand out just tell me, I'll go stand out on the sidewalk on the street corner and take a bullet, right? Like essentially he was willing to die to keep the secret. And so who knows how much that is.
So what do you think that is? What do you think? That is that mind control, or is that true belief or ideology, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, it was the way it was described for him specifically. I think it was just a legitimate, strange, conservative sort of loyalty that he did have to individuals within the inner circle. But at the same time, he was like set up by E. Howard Hunt and James McCord to sort of take this fall. But then it was layered in terms of who was aware of what. And again, it was like Watergate's one of the craziest stories ever, because E. Howard Hunt takes G. Gordon Liddy at one point to have a discussion with the CIA poisons expert. And they're talking about how they could legitimately use these various strategies of targeted assassination to execute Jack Anderson, the Washington the Post columnist, who's fucking peeling back the layers of essentially covert operations and pointing a light into the current administration's kind of corruption. And especially there was something to do with specifically him exposing something in terms of the Pakistan conflict with India at the time. It was very interesting the way it was explained, but so he takes G. Gordon Liddy to have this conversation, and they talk about it was they had one specific strategy where they would utilize a vehicle to strike his car at a specific angle, which they claimed 9 out of 10 times it would the end result would be death for the individual in the priority targeted car vehicle, and then the other was a technique known as aspirin roulette, and they would essentially put a poison pill in the priority target's aspirin bottle and wait for it to take effect, which is kind of a low level way of targeted assassination. But still,
they also tried to put LSD on the steering wheel, right?
Oh yeah, man. There was a lot more that they attempted to do. Yeah.
So and let me ask you this about Jack Anderson, considering all these Watergate matters being Mormon stuff. He was a Mormon, very prominent Mormon family he hailed from. That's
so crazy, man. I wasn't sure. I just knew that he always he went to bat for Jeffrey McDonald during the Fort Bragg murders, and he always seemed to be kind of in every way. Whenever I stumble upon Jack Anderson's work, he seems to be spot on in terms of just kind of questioning the current establishment and these corrupt clandestine operations, and he had many different assets who seem to be reliable sources within the context of the intelligence apparatus, which I find very interesting. Clearly,
I don't disagree. I put him in the same bucket as Ted Gunderson, old Uncle Ted, because there's some shit he produces that is legitimate, but then he's out there shit coating the McMartin tunnels at the same time they're doing an archaeological dig. He's out there with the parents with shovels making a big scene about the situation.
Right. You think that was in order to shit coat, as you just said, because I found it.
Well, look who else he hires in the McDonald case, if I may, sir. Look who else he hires in the McDonald case. He gets Alan Dershowitz, F. Lee Bailey, and John Markham involved in the appeals of Jeffrey McDonald. I have to say,
I didn't know Gunderson was responsible for that.
I think his initial interactions was with F. Lee Bailey, and F. Lee Bailey kind of sanctioned the rest of the guys, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Now, I definitely could see that 100%. The Alan Dershowitz connection freaks me out
100%. Big time. But we see the same connections here in Idaho today. We got F. Lee Bailey's buddy. F. Lee Bailey's running a bank out of Miami when the BCCI scandal falls, and the CIA the same operations, right? We see, we see that going on, and then that bank owns $1.5 trillion in Michael Milken and Leon Black's junk bonds from Drexel Burnham Lambert there in 1993. So we see Leon Black up there in the Idaho situation. We see other Bahama bankers that are associated with the BCCI situation that are backing Sam Bankman-Fried up there in his cash for crypto scam that he ran. So we see a lot of these repeating patterns, and again, from back in the 70s, right? Back in the 70s, ongoing matters. But if I may play us a clip here real fast, sir, to go over what again, I think part of the magic show is this limited release of these details, and everyone kind of looks at it like, oh, we took care of Iran Contra decades ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of the general mindset I think is painted, from my perspective at least. Would you think that's agree that's a fair analysis?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, 100%. And if you consider, like, you have all these individuals, like these, it's very strange the way that they utilize the assets to kind of like run tactical, cover up in certain ways and facilitate that cover up in the mind's eye of the subconscious, general public, and so many strange connections that I mean, obviously, when in terms of Clinton was basically chosen, but all the way back, in 63, I think at the very least, I think was when he was already chosen by the CIA connections to the Old Boys Network, and he was kind of placed on the path, and that's just like perfectly in line with the way the sort of PatCon operation evolved under the Clinton administration, right? Because that I always found very interesting. But anyway,
for sure.
Yeah,
no, for sure.
You can play this though, because I did find it very, very strange though, the Branch Davidian raid, how many of the individuals who were directly involved during the Clinton campaign, who 3 of the 4 federal agents were executed during the Branch Davidian siege, right? That it was 3 of them were legitimately tied to these strange cases that involved serial killers and were also working for Bill Clinton during the campaign, which then they find themselves, among the Clinton body count during the Waco massacre. So it's just like, I no longer can you kind of believe that those things are coincidental. If you do, I think that you're absolutely, just mischaracterizing, the power structure in general. But
for sure. And to comment on Dr. Corbeau here, we discussed this aspect. I appreciate that comment there, Dr. Corbeau. We discussed the ongoing nature of these cults even after the leaders and compounds get burnt down, right? In our Order of the Solar Temple conversation, right?
Exactly. And BCCI, of course, comes up in the OTS. And
I think it comes up in the PatCon documents as well, sir. I think it comes up in the PAC. They're discussing a Bahamian Bank in 1978, and I think that's BCCI.
Exactly. And they're coming, I mean, honestly, it's the direct connection to how they were, smuggling. It was arms smuggling and drug trafficking, right? That's 100% was involved.
Same old hood rat shit, right, Austin? I like to call it hood rat shit. It's a very technical term.
All while laundering money through these plausible deniability, cutouts, basically. And
there you go. Well, if I may play this clip, and we'll get started, based upon what old Senator Inouye wants to tell us here.
Obviously, these hearings have been about issues much more profound than who did what or knew what in the Iran Contra affair. They have presented 2 visions of government, much as the Constitutional Convention was presented with different views of the relationship between government and its citizens 200 years ago. One vision was described in the testimony of Admiral Poindexter, Lieutenant Colonel North, General Secord, and Mr. Hakim, that of a secret government directed principally by NSC staffers, accountable to not a single elected official, including apparently the president himself. A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. It is an elitist vision of government that trusts no one, not the people, not the Congress, and not the cabinet.
So I think it's just fascinating, especially I'll play a clip here in a minute where he makes some remarks near his death in recent years, where he is talking about accountability, but he's part of the team not to hold anyone accountable.
Right. Yeah. And when and by the way, it wasn't 63. It was 68 when he was hanging out as his time with the Oxford Scholarship, right? What was it as far as Bill Clinton being recruited by London chief Cord Meyer? Like, that's where they claim he became a CIA asset directly, and that is interesting.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense because he quits Oxford, right? And then he goes on a tour of the USSR, does he not?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens by 69. He inevitably goes to Moscow on this trip where he's part of a mission to smuggle out this memoir of an ex-Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev, which was then translated, which is very interesting. But it seems like he was for sure, and this was all as far as in the scope of what the CIA was after in terms of kind of the operation at play here, because I think this was all on behalf of the CIA, since there was clearly you had Khrushchev denouncing Stalin, and so it was obviously kind of like a CIA operation to present a plausible alternative to the Russian people in certain ways, but at the same time provide like this misdirection and false narrative on the sort of global stage, I think, and that's what Bill Clinton was after.
What you're saying. That computes with some of that dynamic there. What are your thoughts here on this comment? This is a fascinating dynamic that here with Bill Clinton going to Alma, Arkansas for a Dolly Parton meeting at Tony Alamo's restaurant.
Wow. Yeah, nothing strange there, huh?
Like as a native Arkansanian, is that right? Native Arkansan.
Arkansan. Yeah, they call them Arkansans. Yeah,
that's pretty even anomalous there for you, right? Hearing about that kind of stuff, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it just I'm not at all ever surprised and as far as the way these networks function and operate, and that's why, over time, you just begin to realize like how very often you're witnessing the sort of recycled tactics in the resurfacing playbook. And that's why I just can't stand how often I mean, not at all did I expect the Iran Contra angle in the Atlanta child murders, but it still comes up. But I will say the last I never mentioned that clearly Barry Seal, I think it's very important whenever he did get arrested, right? And they seized that he was attempting to smuggle in those 14,000 pounds of explosives, right, out of the U.S. to Cuba through the anti-Castro forces in Mexico. It was a DC-4 which was seized at the Shreveport Regional Airport, and it had like all these plastic C4 explosives and explosive primer cord and electric blasting caps and like thousands, right? 7,000 feet of this. And so there it gets even
army,
crazier.
Sir. That's a secret army that NMA was talking about.
Exactly.
So you're making some great points. If I may, though, Noriega, so you're talking about repeating patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently reading a DEA report that Noriega had a quote-unquote Madame Morris style cult set up in his home.
Wow.
I'm sorry, altar. Madame Morris style altar.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think Metamoros, I'm under the impression that now they claim that the finders were those individuals in Tallahassee when they were apprehended with those children. They claimed they were taking them down to a school for what was it, for bright or smart children in Mexico, and it turns out to have been this Jesuit institution that they were claiming they were going to take these children to. But it surrounding the fact that Metamoros and the scandal that's happening in terms of the Hand of Death cult and Henry Lee Lucas and right.
Well, if I may, there on the Metamoros situation, one of those. Again, I've been looking at a lot of the victimology in a lot of these cases because, again, in that one you have the main figure, Kilroy. He's the nephew of a DEA agent, I believe it is, or ATF agent, one of the two. And then you look at the activity of Adolfo Costanzo. So the Interpol chief from Mexico was inserting Adolfo Costanzo into different Mexican drug cartels to infiltrate them as their satanic cult leader within. Again, these patterns even persist with folks like Noriega, having these cartels have their little cult leader situation, right? So Interpol chief was doing that. That was his third cartel that they had inserted him into. The Interpol chief, when Matamoros got busted, the Interpol chief ate a bullet on a highway down near Mexico City.
Of course. My God, man. It's just never ending, honestly. Yeah. I just when you see how much
it's creepy, dude. It's creepy. All these things persist, right? Let's be honest about the situation.
Yeah, there's no doubt, man. And I mean, I don't understand how, it takes time, obviously, to kind of find this path of kind of just in terms of like figuring out where to begin, which is another problem. I think it's just, if you don't know what to look for, you might not quite understand what you're stumbling into. And I think that happens so very often when people attempt to research some of these more relevant scandals that I think provide the window that we're speaking on. So, really since the beginning.
I think that's a very salient point. If I may, that's a great introduction to a clip I have here on deck. If I may play this, when I'm considering these terms, as you just explained, they're very complex. There's a lot of ins, a lot of outs.
Is that a lot of what have yous? Oh my God.
So, I often consider this man and these statements he made on the Johnny Carson show back in January of 1968.
Isn't that terribly confusing? And don't you seem to be riding off in all directions?
It seems like it, doesn't it? Let me ask you.
It certainly does.
Right. Let me ask you first, how many hours do I have to answer this list you just went over?
Well, I know that we have the rest of the program this evening. I understand that we can't sit here and completely recreate or theorize on what happened. But I just wanted to get the chronology of the statements.
Well, let me see if I can put this in focus. If I were to say, for example, that an elephant has a tail, and he's gray, and he has 4 legs, it would be possible for somebody to point out, just a minute, you just finished saying an elephant had a tail, now you say he has 4 legs, and now you say he's gray. The point I'm making is that each of these factors is a characteristic of one being, and in a complex situation like this, it's possible to be standing at a different point of view and describing different aspects. For example, we find that in the group...
Hey, there we're back. Programming errors. So what are your thoughts there? I see a man who's facing against this whole weird network that he doesn't quite understand. Wandering Bishop, CIA, Mafia, Lee Harvey Oswald, David Ferry. Then he knows Guy Bannister going back to his FBI days. Then he sees the process coming to town during his grand jury investigation where he's subpoenaing folks. And he sees, his primary subjects, Barbara Reed, Lee Harvey Oswald, all intermingling with the process. And they hire one of his subjects, a wandering bishop, Tommy Jude Baumler. So when Garrison's making those statements, he's faced with possibly the greatest mystery, I think, ever.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, because if you see how often the process finds itself involved in this sort of, because that's what I always find it very interesting in terms of how the network reveals itself, right? Because that is very interesting to me, and it was something that it becomes undeniable, and so I think it was exactly what I was alluding to, where he stumbled upon something that was entirely unexpected and so extraordinary that it was hard to come to terms with, but through the excruciating, credible, legitimate, corroborative evidence that proves out these reinforcing connections, then you come to this crossroads where you have no other option than to move forward and address this for what it is, and attempt to at least provide more and more clarity the further down this rabbit hole you go. Or you can put your head in the sand and start, embracing the mantra, ignorance is bliss, because I feel like so very often people would rather remain ignorant to many of these connections because of how kind of like it's almost like it's intimidating, right?
For sure, dude. It's the big lie that old Schittler talks about, right?
Exactly.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying, and that's a lot of what I'm saying when I make the point we got to identify the problem before we can fix it.
Definitely, man. Yeah.
So this is a very fascinating comment by Dr. Corbell. Are you familiar with that?
Process chapter in Bentonville, Arkansas, not that far from the Walmart home office, and there are BFAs. Wait, hold on. Commercials playing the hot. Whoa.
So they have a big Bentonville, Arkansas location financed by the Walton family. They got Sam Walton's dog as a statue. His daughter's a big financier.
Yeah, no. Hey, man, I've been to the Bentonville Square. I grew up like 30 minutes from that area, right, in a very small town called Gravett. And so, yeah, I wouldn't at all be surprised due to the amount of money in that area, right? Especially considering it's not only Walmart, it's JB Hunt, it's Tyson. They specifically kind of coexist and coalesce into this Northwest Arkansas specifically, really. But there's a lot of money in that area, so it makes sense to me that you would have sort of like maybe a fundamental nexus in place within the framework of this location. And considering also, the state itself, the geographical nature of the state, I think the northwest corner, it would make a lot more sense where a lot of this would kind of, reveal itself due to the financial obligations to kind of like, I don't know, I see these like sort of how the operations kind of facilitate the network through these hubs, right? These very much like
you're spot on, because we see a lot of the PACON stuff going through that same region too, right? We see a lot of the white nationalist stuff from the Hayden Lake compound in Idaho going down to Arkansas. A lot of crimes. There's been bank robberies from that crew down in Northwest Arkansas. There's been gun dealers been robbed and murdered in Northwest Arkansas from the plans and people launched from Hayden Lake, Idaho.
Oh, Jesus, dude. I know that I certainly want to do an entire episode dedicated to the boys on the tracks as well, because I think that would be a very interesting way to approach some of this, as far as like I think it's another example of what happens whenever you need to sort of cover your tracks and you inevitably become a bit sloppy within the framework of the covert operation. And then also I think it's
there's a chaos factor to everything, right? You can't Murphy's Law, right? What can happen will happen kind of deal. And you 100%. Can't plan to cover up everything. There is going to be some holes in matters, right?
Oh yeah. There's no doubt.
I think this is a good example of it too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think understanding how valuable of an asset Clinton was as the governor, it became a strategic hub during that time, obviously. And I don't know how much it's ever recovered. I honestly think so many, and I think you have
ongoing enterprises, right, sir? Ongoing enterprises.
Exactly.
If I may follow up with some more comments from the man who investigated Watergate, lead investigator, and the chairman for the Iran Contra hearings, Senator Daniel Inouye.
Now, in your senatorial career, you have certainly accomplished a great deal and been here a long time. But one of the, or a couple of the most important congressional investigations in recent history have involved you as well. You've been involved in them as one of the investigators in the Watergate Committee and the Iran Contra hearings. You mentioned you had been a prosecutor before you came to the House. How much has that background and the service on those committees formed your thoughts regarding public service and the country?
Well, my service as assistant prosecutor didn't mean that much, but one thing that impressed me was that in this land, no one is above the law. In other places, if you're the king or the emperor or the dictator, you're above the law. You make the law. But in the United States, even the president is subject to the law. And he has to answer for his deeds or misdeeds. And that really impressed me. You read about it in books, but to see it in operation is something else. The other thing that impressed me...
Isn't that hilarious?
Dude, my God, that is so crazy.
This is from the guy who held no one accountable, right? I mean, he helped cover the whole ordeals up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes to show, man. Like, it's very interesting to see who is fundamentally compromised and actually emotionally affected, and who seemed to be a psychopathic perpetrator involved. It's very interesting to try and discern for yourself the levels of sort of I think that
it's tough. I understand what you're saying. I think it's tough. I would look at it like this, if I may. It's tough to once you identify the magic show, it's tough to discern whether or not someone's deceived or they're the deceiver.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I find so many people kind of becoming useful assets, but that also it's almost like that is their role to begin with in the first place. And so they fall perfectly into the establishment line, the narrative that they're attempting to facilitate. And it's all due to kind of convenience, because they don't want to, in any way, they know what propels them forward in the context of this framework, right, of the power paradigm, how you're benefited and rewarded, and basically what's the
right
term?
up into the point until you're not, right? Like Barry Seal, he got away with so much, and then he gets murked in a parking lot by a bunch of Colombians, allegedly, right?
Right.
As the story goes, right?
But prior to all of that, it's clearly like when you're failing forward, right, where so many people are promoted
for sure
for what should be clearly, the moments of consequence, but that's never the case, because as we've been discussing from the moment we began, they are insulated from any real accountability, right? So
you ain't kidding. And if I may on that point, sir, play another clip from Daniel anyway, from that same interview we just saw, where he's commenting on how they achieved that goal you just pointed out, where there's no one being held accountable, and his commentary on the media is hilarious.
About these hearings was the awesome power of the media and television especially. And up until then, I was totally unknown, other than Hawaii, which is not even 1% of the population. And but after Watergate, I began receiving not just tens of letters, but hundreds and thousands of letters. And one day, Mr. Gallup visited me, and he says, according to the latest poll, the most recognizable person is the President of the United States. And guess who's next to him? He says, you. I said, how can I be the one? He said, well, you look different. But the media can be powerful.
Wasn't that cute? The media can be powerful, right?
Right. That's so crazy to me. I think understanding the role of like the financiers behind these interesting enterprise, what really is, I mean, the Iran Contra enterprise, I think is just, it's really like, I don't know, I always refer to it as modern Gladio. That's just the way I refer to it. You clearly refer to it as, Iran Contra, Idaho Contra in a way, because it never ended, sort of thing, right? But
well, Dave McGowan's right when he said that the program to kill theory, right? When he said that that's the Phoenix program come home, that's what started me on this journey of trying to understand. And when you get to it, you see Bill Colby, you see all of his queers, and they're all doing these things across the board, right?
Exactly.
It's just the same pattern of behavior of these ongoing operations. And again, we see these ongoing operations described to us in film. And are you familiar with the 1987 cinematic masterpiece Lethal Weapon?
Oh, of course. Oh my God.
So we see them literally describing these activities and ongoing enterprises in the film. And if I may play a clip from that right here to emphasize these points we're making in these these matters of national security, right?
What you got? Part of the device. Oh, this is artwork. This is goddamn artwork.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
No, you don't get it. This is real pro stuff. I haven't seen anything like this since the war.
Come again, come on.
Now, the CIA, they used to hire mercs. They use the exact same setup. Mercury switches, kaflooey, that's heavy shit.
Sarge, I think we got something over.
So we see them talking about kind of these Gladio operations. They're blowing up a witness on domestic soil, right?
Yeah, and that is it's kind of something I found a little interesting earlier. Like just I'm kind of Rush Hour just came on randomly on TV, right? And I saw like now obviously not only there's the Chris Tucker Epstein connection, but clearly you have like just in the plot itself, like this Chinese diplomat's daughter, right, gets abducted, but clearly it was this staged child abduction, right? And the way that they staged it was they clearly had the security detail. They had a police presence, right? They had police protection where they had infiltrated. At the very least, they were posing as local police who are directing traffic, and they direct the security details vehicle to a private area where obviously another individual within the framework of this operation is posing as a police officer with a squad car, pulls up and essentially they commit a targeted assassination to the security detail, execute them on the spot, and then abduct the child in broad daylight. And I'm just like, man, this is legitimately how the operations function. And all I think of is I think it's important just to, as far as like the average public being aware of the fact that so many of these like very strange child abductions, they utilize these driving services and various, interesting, I would say just like resurfacing tactics that seem to be utilized so very often in terms of the criminal enterprise, that where these sort of at the very least human trafficking raises its ugly head. Unfortunately, this seems to be on par, right?
Sure. If I may, sir, you said queer or you said strange. I would say yes, strange in a queer sense. And here we have Bob Cocaine Evans with his buddy Henry Kissinger, an explanation no one could describe how these two were ever friends for decades. And then there's no shortage of these photographs over decades with Cocaine Bob there kissing on Brett Ratner.
What the fuck, dude? Yep. That is so crazy.
Brett Ratner's on Instagram. He celebrates these matters.
Wow. Man,
I like the description of Rush Hour, though. That's a great understanding of these things that we see represented to us in these media forms, and it's almost like a soft disclosure, because then honestly, I've tried to have some conversations with folks over the years, and they're like, no, you're just describing a film. Whatever film it may be. I'm like, no, these are actual events. The writers of that film may have based them on them. They may have been familiar with them. I did a show a few weeks back with Jonathan Mitchell, who does some great research into Maury Terry's investigations into the Son of Sam and the process there in New York City. And he described in great detail in a blog, and we did a film review of a film called Ghost Story from Peter Straub's book from 1978. Well, it was published in January of 79. But he obviously writes it in the months after Berkowitz is arrested, and he knows all these intimate details of the Son of Sam cult and the process activity around it, embeds them in the tale, and this is long before Maury Terry even knows these details.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a little bit suspect.
Yeah, sometimes. Well, he's also friends with Stephen King, so they've done a couple books together, Peter Straub and him. So,
my God.
A lot of times stuff's right in our face, and I think that's what it was in with Lethal Weapon. If I may play us another clip here describing this ongoing enterprise from Bill Colby's Military Assistance Command of Vietnam, there with these, matters of national security that continue to perpetrate throughout the years, and is described to us in detail in again the 1987 cinematic masterpiece Lethal Weapon.
When you called me the other day, you were going to blow the whistle, right?
Blow the whistle on what?
You were going to spill your guts so they kill your daughter. Tell me if I'm wrong. And talk to me. They killed your daughter. They paid off a hooker to poison your little girl. Talk to me.
For my sake, Roger, I've got another daughter.
She'll be protected.
You can't protect her. You don't know these people.
Acquaint me with them.
It goes all the way back to the war. I ended up working with a group called Air America, CIA front. They secretly ran the entire war out of Laos. I was with a special unit called Shadow Company, Mercs, trained killers. When Charlie was bringing in heroin to finance the VC government, Shadow Company went in, we burned the whole thing down. We killed everybody. We also formed a plan.
Keep talking.
A couple of years ago, Shadow Company got together again. The war was over, but we still had our list of sources in Asia.
And
we've been bringing it in ever since.
Bringing in what?
My God,
Well,
dude.
I think they kind of shit code it there, right? But we see it kind of right in our faces, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, they're like, oh, we got back together later. You know, we only do 2 shipments a year. You know what I mean?
That's so ridiculous, especially like, I mean, it just in terms of Air America coming up in the finders, right? Obviously, Epstein. It's just like it's something that is undeniable as far as when you see what was it, Marion David Petty's son actually was an employee of Air America, which is hilarious. That of course he had that
Right.
history.
There you go.
with
That
the
makes
Civil
sense
Air
if he's in that
Patrol.
Civil Air Patrol unit, right?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. So I mean, it fits
like your
perfect
style.
in my opinion. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, so this is clearly a CIA front organization, which is utilized for smuggling drugs, and this is at the time that they're running drugs out of Thailand and the Golden Triangle and in Vietnam
Yeah.
and all of this as well. Like, I think it's so crazy how many of these strategic hubs exist in the domestic U.S. where, like, not only do you have, you know, these strange kind of, like, if you think of like just the Cadaver Connection in the Jeffrey McDonald case, right? It always comes to mind in terms of.
I like how you just phrased that, sir. I mean, you said call them domestic hubs, and that's the best way to look at it. Regional hubs in a logistical fashion in which to perpetrate your things in the geographic regions you need to.
Exactly. And that's
one
why,
of those geographic hubs seems to be Idaho.
Hell yeah, it does. And I think Atlanta is as well. And I think Dallas was for certain, at the very least. Dallas and Houston were very much a part of that. And especially, yeah, acid is groovy, says Tara Jackson. Seriously, acid is groovy, kill the pigs, right? Says Helena Stokely and the few other occultists who were there for the initiatory ritualistic murder. I think it was a fertility death ritual where they killed the 3-year-old and 5-year-old daughters and the pregnant wife, which of Jeffrey McDonald, which, by the way, I think the pregnant wife was the priority. And if you listen to Helena Stokely, that's what she herself says. She claims that they were there not only to send a message to Jeffrey McDonald, but she also claimed that it did somewhat get out of hand. But, you know, I think that there were, you know, the individual that was involved in kind of leading them into who had like actually had a you know, a military uniform on during the time that he's beating Jeffrey McDonald with a bat, and he's being stabbed in the chest with an ice pick, and it's puncturing his lung, and yeah, it's kind of a fascinating story. But
Well,
again,
do you know who was there immediately preceding these events at Fort Bragg at that same Special Warfare Center? That
Michael Aquino, I believe,
yes,
was. I think he
it's
was
the weight of this man's
stationed-
activities that concerns me. But if you
Absolutely.
brought up a good segue into a great point here in this discussion, and that is 4 people brutally murdered in their home in the middle of the night. Right? Sounds like the Manson family Polanski murders. Sounds like the McDonald's murders. McDonald's, the restaurant, the Jeffrey McDonald family murders. It sounds like 4 college students brutally murdered in their home, allegedly in their sleep on 11/13/2022.
Wow. What the hell? Where was this, in Idaho specifically?
This is the Idaho 4 murder, sir, and the person running point on propaganda is Bob Cocaine Evans' protege, Graydon Carter.
My God, that is so crazy. So what
It gets better. But go ahead.
I'm just instantly curious as far as the connections to the victims. You know, I'm just wondering what exactly.
We'll definitely get there in a moment, because it goes right back up to Hayden Lake.
Let's hear it, brother. What do you got for me? I'm very interested in all of this. I think, you know, the modern aspect of these.
Before we get there,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
I just think the modern aspect of these sort of, you know, the enterprise has not died, right? It has not subsided to as far as I think it's very important for people to remember these domestic operations and these clandestine operations. They've only been rebranded, right? And typically they're kind of driven into this sort of, you know, again, they have to kind of cycle through their technique. I think it's very interesting how right you see them not only do the new age esoteric organizations.
No shit, I did not. Oh, I apologize.
that?
Right, just reacting to Dr. Corbo's statements here.
What's
No,
he
you're spot
saying?
on. No, I apologize for interrupting you, Austin. You're spot on. These
No,
are
bro.
ongoing enterprises. They have a good job of wrapping them up. But I think that's why we see so many parallels today, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but I think they clearly are still very active, and it's just interesting to see that ritualistic murders are still taking place, and yet very underreported and unacknowledged as far as the general public's concerned. It doesn't quite appeal to the majority of people as it once did. It's kind of strange how, the satanic panic, it did effectively kind of misdirect public consumption and their ability to kind of interpret some of these more what I believe to be ritualistic style murders for a reason. I think a purpose. I think the symbolic nature of them is not by accident, and so yeah, I definitely don't believe in coincidence any longer. And something
there's
like
a lot
this,
of symbolism and occultism, I think, rooted in this matter. But if I may, sir, are you familiar with the Robert Mogan from the Epstein book? I am not.
Yes, yeah, but again, it's just like, man, that's another perfect example, right? Epstein and Iran Contra.
He rears his ugly head tonight through Leon Black, the money launderer there from BCCI, Iran Contra of the early 90s.
Oh,
This Iran Contra concept that reared its head through BCCI after the hearings, right, in 87, right?
Oh,
Almost 38 years to the date, by the way, was when Daniel Inouye was making those remarks. So 37 years later, or 38 years later, we're still looking like, oh, what we're new. We don't know what to do. And it is these matters, these circles and connections we're discussing tonight, I think, that is identifying the problem because of the satanic panic. If there's only a panic and there's no satanic, then how can you identify the problem?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Epstein, I mean, come on now. You look at the connections to Adnan Khashoggi and the arms smuggling that was as far as like I believe it was not only. By the way, it was, I think it was the IAG, I believe is what the organization was called. And Intercontinental Assets Group is the name of the organization which was assisting these clients of Epstein, which was the reason why people referred to him as this like high level financial bounty hunter, right? But in reality, he's just embezzling funds. That's essentially he's laundering money.
Sure. He's a front dude all day, right? He's a front cover dude all day, right?
Yeah, and that's why he's stationed in Saudi Arabia while he's working with Adnan Khashoggi, right? Why that is why Epstein had an Austrian passport that right where he's given this false name and he has a passport that showed he was living in his place of residence was in Saudi Arabia. And at that very time was when he's actually like working on behalf of Adnan Khashoggi in their deals in Iran Contra, in smuggling weapons during the Iran.
You beat me to it. You beat me to it, sir.
It's fucking crazy.
With the Khashoggis, we got Scientology and Iran Contra, right? Because his wife was a major Scientologist.
Yes, and it's even funnier. Have you ever seen that picture of Adnan Khashoggi with Paris Hilton and Ghislaine Maxwell standing right behind them? It's like the craziest picture ever. And clearly Adnan Khashoggi, his yacht, which was entirely rigged with audiovisual blackmail, was then later purchased by Trump. And and we discussed last night on Already Dead as well how Trump was tied to the hotel where J. Edgar Hoover was blackmailed in the what did they call them, the Blue Suite parties or something like that. Can't remember now. Well, but Roy
you're making
Cohn,
some fantastic points, sir. And if I may bring us kind of circle back here to, I'm really excited to introduce you to the gooch here. This is going to blow up your brain hole, Austin. But regarding Epstein, I want to bring him up again here relative to when we talk about Leon Black, P. Diddy, and Epstein. All these people end up walking, right? They all walk, right?
Absolutely.
So, and they all coalesced in around this these matters in Idaho, this Idaho Contra business, and I have another clip to set the stage on how the white nationalist compound kind of brings right into what we're talking about today, based upon a book written in 1996 around the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, which again, all of these matters are revolving all around that situation, including old Cocaine Bob and Bill Colby. His son, Carl Colby, was one of the primary witnesses against Orenthal James Simpson for the state of California.
No way. I didn't know that. That's
go,
so hilarious.
Go figure.
My God.
They left him out of the documentary, I think. You know what I mean? The Netflix documentary.
Convenient.
But this lady, Victoria Gooch, Idaho State Police detective, no one knew her name relative to the Idaho 4 murders until December 2024, January 2025, because there's been an unprecedented level of secrecy in this case, right? And on that note, if I may just introduce you to the victim's father, Kaylee Gonsalves' father, Steve Gonsalves, he agrees with me on this levels of secrecy in matters of national security.
And I've kind of heard that came from the media pressure. The media themselves, who had a challenge to the gag order, basically said, this is not something that is in law. Like, gag orders are for national security. Gag orders are not usually for an everyday crime in a state.
Matters of national security, huh? Now, he lives just outside that Hayden Lake compound, the former site of that Hayden Lake compound, by the way, and his brother's a Nazi who's in prison for murder, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I just want to first introduce you to the Gooch. So when we're talking matters of national security, the Manson family murders, the Gooch's father here, so we didn't hear about her because of the secrecy, right? And then suddenly things get released. She's the most integral detective in the entire case in the frame job against Brian Kohberger. For example, the initial probable cause arresting affidavit for Brian Kohberger in December 29th of 2022 claimed the surviving roommates, one of them was in quote unquote frozen shock phase and didn't call 911 for 8 hours. We later learned that that's bullshit because all of their transcript from all their phone activity was released. They're taking photographs, Snapchats, Instagrams, Indeed. Apparently they're applying for jobs while their friends are laying dead on the floor, right? Taking photographs, sending pictures, making phone calls. So we know the frozen shock phase is bullshit. Also, in that same frozen shock phase, that same roommate allegedly saw Brian Kohberger with bushy eyebrows and a balaclava. So that's all thanks to Victoria Gooch. We don't learn that, though, for over 2 years. We also don't learn that she's the investigator that is integral in the DNA handling an investigation that allegedly ties to Brian Kohberger. So she's not the lead investigator, but she is the most integral investigator. And her father happened to be the U.S. Army intelligence officer, protege of Colonel Paul Tate.
Jesus.
It gets better, sir. Her father apparently went undercover with Paul Tate in 1970 in the hippie movement to investigate his daughter Sharon Tate's murder at the hands of the Manson family.
Wow. My God, man.
So, and you don't have to take my word for it. I'll play a clip here from Victoria Gooch herself describing these activities. Now, she describes it as her father continues to work for Paul Tate in retirement, and they moved to San Francisco Bay with Paul Tate in 1970. Well, and she doesn't see her father for 4 years. Well, if anyone knows the lore of Paul Tate and the Manson murders, that's because Paul Tate went undercover. So it sounds like, in her own words, she's describing her father at least assisted in that or went undercover with Paul Tate, right?
Wow. Man,
and I'll
play
that clip for us here right now. Isn't that wild stuff?
Yeah.
And then, relative to the Manson murders, Cocaine Bob is who introduced and brokered the marriage between fellow process members, Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. So we have this weird nexus point when his protege is running propaganda point on all this stuff.
Man, that is, layered connections as far as I'm concerned.
Pretty wild, right? Pretty wild.
Yeah, so, dude, like there's no way that people could actually accept this at face value as far as not being an entirely, deliberately controlled operation, at every level. It just makes no sense to me.
I wholeheartedly agree, sir. And that's why I revisited a lot of these topics in October of 2024, that this clip we'll play from Victoria Gooch was produced in an interview she did with some law enforcement channel on YouTube, right? So some folk of the interweb sent it to me, And that's how I discovered. So I revisited this because this was published in December of 2022, right? Citing a retired police captain from Chicago who's a pretty prominent private detective, and he was citing police sources that spoke to him about it, right? And they said that there was blood written on the walls, like in the McDonald case, like in the Manson case with the Tate Polanski murders, right? Tate Polanski house. And in fact, the state of Idaho removed drywall from one of the rooms of the murder scene here at the house in early December of 2022, confirmed.
Do we know what was written on the wall in blood?
They never even gave an excuse of why they removed drywall, sir, but they did remove. They emptied this house out on December 7th when they were still looking for a suspect. They removed the drywall shortly thereafter. So usually don't tear down a crime scene before you have a suspect. You know what I mean? But they were ardent on that plan to do so. For example, on December 30th, when Brian Koberg was arrested in Pennsylvania by the FBI, kicking down his door in the middle of the night, in the Pennsylvania State Police, courtesy of the FBI, whose hands are over every piece of this investigation that's not related to Gooch. It's all FBI stuff, which is intriguing. But nonetheless, his attorney in Idaho, Ann Taylor, is stopping the destruction of the murder scene at the same time he's sitting in a Pennsylvania jail getting booked in. Because they had a team, the state of Idaho had a team in the driveway in the home murder scene ready to tear it down on the morning of December 30th, the day they apprehended and arrested Brian Koberg.
My God, man. Yeah. No, there's no way.
It reeks of spook biz, right?
Yeah.
Spook biz, right?
Absolutely. I'm just wondering, like, what could the motivating factor be in terms of the actual deaths themselves? What do you think? What is your sort of theory behind why this took place in the fashion that it did? Because
I'm glad you asked that, sir. That's a good question. And it does relate to this topic of the Manson murder. So what was at the heart of the Manson murders? Was it drug trafficking, right?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways,
house, right?
Yeah, I think clearly the operation was then kind of used in this layered fashion where they clearly had I think there's always this level of psychological social engineering that's involved with especially the most scandalous in terms of a lot of these cases, and so when it's blown out of proportion and legitimately kind of honestly, I mean, it naturally, I think it definitely was going to be a huge story due to the connections to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate being an actual actress that's very well, I mean, at least well known at the time, but definitely Roman Polanski's far more well known. But still, I think it was bound to make an impact due to the just the celebrity culture that was affected. I think obviously it's very appealing to the outside, average person. But
I think on that note, that's what we heard from Jim Garrison, right? What you're trying to describe is that elephant, and that's one aspect of that elephant is the media perpetration and psychological warfare. I think, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
and I think to this question, though, we're talking about the Aryans, so the process are Nazis. Just look at their symbol, listen to their words; they'll tell you, right?
Yes, they will. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, but yeah, I think that clearly they wanted to utilize the Manson murders as an op that would, achieve, sort of like, I think they have many different goals in mind that they were kind of utilizing that operation for, especially considering the Krupp Ranch and the proximity to Spawn Ranch and that being an old sort of paperclip Nazi enclave in a way, right? Which is very interesting to me. I always found that strange. But
the nearby Murphy Ranch is what you're talking about, or the Murphy City they built. The Nazis built that city in the nearby canyon as well too, not far from Spawn Ranch.
Really? So now that makes sense. But Krupp Ranch was specifically it bordered Spawn Ranch, and it was like this old. I have to find the actual specific family that it was connected back to, because this all ties in my mind. I think it's a layered operation that brings in these tactics that were utilized in the Phoenix program. And I think that Charles Manson was just another useful experimental subject that they could then utilize in the field, and clearly they hung him out to dry at a certain level. But it's very interesting in terms of there's no way that Manson is responsible for creating snuff films, distributing the snuff films, and various other what seemed to be these sort of what it was like. It modeled the enterprise that we effectively see playing out in so many ways in terms of how
you're making some great points. It's organized, right? It's definitely organized.
Oh,
we see a corporate structure, right? Almost, right?
No doubt. But yeah, I did think that strange connection to this sort of, just again, this direct paperclip Nazi connection to the ranch that is bordering Spawn Ranch, right? It's just like, to me, there's no way that's any sort of coincidental happening, right? I think Spawn Ranch.
I totally agree, sir. I totally agree. Yeah. There's a lot of Nazis in that region, because this was courtesy of Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. He points out that this compound was built, this Nazi compound nearby, right in the same general vicinity we're talking about, in the hills there, northern hills of Hollywood Hills there, and it was housed to the home, I think, 30,000 residents with water, electricity, and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
1930s. This is pre-World War II.
Jesus, dude. Like, to me, I just I think that what they're always attempting to sort of misdirect us from acknowledging is 100%. Okay, Krupp was what does he say, industrialist that ran the Nazi John J. McCoy, was sent to Germany to pardon and return his assets. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, that fits well with
right?
kind of, 100%. And not at all surprising to me, right? As far as
I don't think any of this stuff gets surprising to me at this point, Austin, because let's listen to Victor. When this blew up my brain hole when the folk of the interweb sent me this clip from Victoria Gooch, but like at this point in time, I'm just like, yeah, it's business as usual.
Background about growing up, what your family life was like, where you grew up, stuff like that.
So my grandparents are Greek immigrants that ended up in Idaho. So I have parents, both sets, born and raised here. But I have a twin. In the early 60s, my dad was in the Army as an officer stationed in Greece. And my twin sister and I have a unique background. We were born on actually Greek soil in the Athens, where my family comes from. So we hold dual citizenship. So the first formative years was spent in Europe and Greece specifically. And then my dad went to Chicago, and we were in Chicago for a period of time while he worked Army intelligence. And then he retired and took a federal government job in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And we moved out there in the 60s. And my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe a little bit of?
So there's a little bit of a background, right? It's very interesting, right? Now she's going to describe that little Bay Area experience and how her father continued to work for Paul Tate in retirement.
There in the 60s, and my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe?
Oops, that's not the right clip. I apologize. What are your thoughts on that while I find this other clip?
Man, honestly, whenever I just think at this point, dude, when you have Howard Hughes so deeply involved with what was going on with the Manson family as well, by the way, I think that's very important to point out, especially in considering the fact that Howard Hughes was kind of tasked with providing the plausible deniability by Nixon himself when he was VP back, before he was actually. It's interesting because he was tasked with kind of providing the intelligence apparatus at the time with the domestic black sites in right within the U.S. where they could train up the Cuban
dude,
exiles,
for sure.
Right? Yeah,
Heidi Love and I have done a couple shows on this topic, and I don't want to divulge too much in this conversation that she and I have planned coming up for next week. But Howard Hughes appears to be a member of the Society of the Cincinnati.
My
appears
God,
to have been
hilarious. I know.
So, and him and Bill Colby link up for that Glomar incident. You know, the famous Glomar disclosure, right?
Oh my God, that's what. Oh,
Colby and Hughes were involved in that one.
I can neither confirm nor deny, my friend.
There you go. And that we can thank Howard Hughes and Bill Colby, both very likely members of the Society of Cincinnati.
Wow. Now
and on that note, let's listen to another member of the Society of Cincinnati's former protege's daughter, Paul Tate, descendant of Lieutenant Jesse Tate, Virginia chapter of the Society of Cincinnati in the Wars of 1776. Very likely that 8.5-month-old boy in Sharon Tate's belly that was murdered as well was, in fact, the only paternal descendant of Paul Tate to take hereditary membership in that group. Because he had 3 daughters, 2 were dead, 1 had a daughter. So unless that 40-year-old granddaughter starts pumping out boys, there's one less member of the society.
My God.
There in the 60s, and my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe a little bit about how your parents were, how they raised you?
So my dad was very strict. He was an Army officer, was in World War II in the Korean conflict, and would have gone to Vietnam, but my mom had didn't really want him going to Vietnam. He'd spent enough time away from home, 28 years. And I have a twin, like I told you, that we were young kids, but we had teenage siblings, and she said, basically, you've already served your country 28 years. I would rather you come home and start in basically coming home every night from work. So this is what happens. In the 60s, he decides to retire, but he takes a government job, a top secret clearance job. She didn't like that he was gone all the time. We moved to the Bay Area, and his top secret clearance job took him away from the house 3 weeks out of every month. So I was raised by my mom, and my dad would come home. He was the provider, but he was a father figure provider, and then he was gone, right? So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and we were fortunate. We had a very caring mom.
Would it be fair to say that you grew up in the Bay Area then?
Yes, that's what formative years up until the time we were 12. And then we moved to Boise, Idaho in 1974. And
what
are your thoughts there, sir? Pretty wild stuff, right?
I smell. Hey, can we play Spot the Spook? I think
right.
that right. It's just so crazy. I think by the way, whenever I did do my Pilgrim Society episode, it's so funny to me that members of, like, we've just been consistently speaking about people such as Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig, right? And these strange usual suspects that continue to kind of prop up their sort of like, what's interesting, you just consistently see them resurfacing in terms of this overall overarching enterprise. And that's why I think it's crazy, because apparently both of them are connected to greenlighting the CIA's Gladio network with Licio Gelli at the time in 74, I believe. He's essentially a financier, right? Who's serving as a liaison at with Nazi Germany, and essentially that's how a lot of the rat lines were staged in certain ways. But what I don't think people realized is that you have the P2 Masonic Lodge heavily involved. You also have as far as like these secret meetings at the U.S. embassies in Rome that were taking place at this specifically at this time when Alexander Haig, who's a member of the Knights of Malta, right, and formerly he was formerly the NATO Supreme Commander as well, which I think is very important because he becomes President Nixon's White House chief of staff, and that's all during when Watergate.
He's the one who helps frame him up, right? He's the one recording shit, right?
Yes, man. Yeah, and it comes down to the fact that it was Haig who essentially, provided. It was he and Bernstein, right? Who's Office of Naval Intelligence, right? Who provide, they provide the Watergate Committee with, hey, you need to talk to John Dean, who's the only motherfucker who's going to be able to sell the, the false, as far as eliminate the CIA defense strategy, which they were attempting to pursue at the beginning, because E. Howard Hunt was on the outside looking in. That's why they killed his wife, right? That's why Dorothy Hunt was murdered in that plane crash. She legitimately was she was the pay mistress who was, running cash to these various, alleged perpetrators and burglars for Watergate at the time. And it's very interesting because she's paying off the surveillance company and the individual who's running the surveillance company that provided James McCord with, the wiretap monitors that he needed, or wiretap surveillance equipment that he needed to rig up the Watergate facility. And so
who was the CIA director during all of this?
Richard Helms, baby. And what does Richard Helms do? He orders the direct destruction of thousands of files, right? CIA files.
And Tricky Dick threatens him on them tapes saying, we know who killed Jack, right? So
who killed? Yeah,
and then he talks about that payoff to E. Howard Hunt with that money that Dorothy Hunt crashed at Midway Airport there in Chicago. Oops. You know, he talks about we got to pay Hunt off because of that whole Bay of Pigs thing. He's going to spill the beans on that whole Bay of Pigs thing.
Because he's Op 40. They knew this all day long.
And I love that quote too. The whole Bay of Pigs thing. Tricky Dick's a real. He's a lot of things. Comedy, he was not, but. We also see everyone get fired out of this. We see Bill Colby come in as the CIA director, right? So all these programs we're discussing really come into an epicenter in American homeland at this time. And we see Bill Colby's departure when Gerald Ford fires his ass and everybody else after the September 1975 incidents where two Manson girls 3 weeks, I didn't mean to do that, two Manson girls 3 weeks apart, in September of 1975 in California tried to kill Gerald Ford. And he's like, oh, weird. So Nelson Rockefeller, the guy that's got his hand up, you know, Henry Kissinger's butt making his mouth move, he almost became an unelected president of the United States if it weren't for Bill Colby, you know, and his queers failing on their mission here to murk Ford out there in California twice.
Yeah. Jesus. You know, who is Deep Throat? I think, dude.
They all are, if you ask me, sir. So if you look at that situation, that gets real processing pretty fast. So we hear about Deep Throat in the media the same time Sonny Franchise's financing the pornography Deep Throat starring Processi and Linda Lovelace, who likes to have sex on film with German Shepherds. Different story altogether. But we see Sonny Franchise, the underboss for the Colombo crime family, financing that film, and then it premieres at a Process Church Theater in West Hollywood, the Pussycat Theaters. As per the files of Ed Sanders, those owners were connected to the process. And as per public reports, Sonny Franchise was financing that film. So it gets real weird. Because that goes back to Bob Cocaine Evans, because he's the one who produced The Godfather with the Colombo crime family.
Jesus, dude. I know that, it's just like the Deep Throat connection to it all was clearly just like an attempted misdirection as well, because I think it was kind of like a layered, you had multiple individuals. It was really like a fabricated source, when in reality it was multiple people who were providing tips. But still, you have Woodward himself, who was sent there on behalf of Alexander Haig. And if you read Lynn Kolodny's book Silent Coup, it effectively describes Woodward as sort of Alexander Haig's cat's paw, where he's doing the bidding, effectively doing the bidding of and by the way, I think it's really important to understand the fact that Donald Graham, who's running the so during the time that Woodward and Bernstein are sort of, you know, in the works with the Post, providing this false narrative to the public, in my mind, and you know, laying the groundwork for how the public would interpret this scandal.
Sure,
you have
that's important.
Donald
Graham,
get the
propaganda right.
Exactly. And so you have Donald Graham running the Washington Post throughout the 50s and directly assisting the CIA during Operation Mockingbird. And he flooded the staff of the Washington Post with intelligence agents. And that included this individual, a journalist by the name of Ben Bradley, who this guy, he's responsible.
Editor, right? Editor of the Washington Post for years, right?
Yep. And he's directly responsible for urging Woodward and Bernstein, for urging them on in that effort to create this story and help bring down the Nixon administration. And Bradley, of course, he shows up a little bit later, being entirely responsible for aiding the media cover-up as far as countering the disclosures of Henry Vinson's gay escort service. And it's so crazy. This was all being uncovered by, right? And it's all being uncovered by members of journalists at the Washington Times at that point. And it turns out that they would, and all of that.
And by the Moonies. Exactly.
And they're running this counter propaganda operation, attempting to seed this narrative. And so just to me, I find in no way, I mean, this is all deliberate, and especially considering when you have, Woodward is directly responsible for providing the Watergate Committee with the notion they needed to ask for this taping system. They wouldn't have had prior knowledge of this taping system if it wasn't for Alexander Haig, and if it wasn't for Bob Woodward. And so when you know that Bob Woodward is running, covert intelligence while he's working for the Office of Naval Intelligence at the time, like, man, he was, honestly, it's too much for people to not recognize the Maura Radford spy scandal and affair that happened, which was basically, they were spying on the Nixon administration from within. And you had Joint Chiefs of Staff who were like accumulating, like, it was very, very interesting. But I think Watergate's one of the most extraordinary
big time, dude. But
stories
it's the same network we're talking about. It's these ongoing
Mhm.
enterprises, right?
100%, buddy. And that's why I think it's one of the most,
I didn't mean to step
fascinating
on you.
aspects of it.
Yeah,
Oh, no, you're good, buddy. The only thing I had left to say was basically that, Alexander Haig.
I got a slight delay going.
Oh, for real? It might be my connection, but who knows? Not entirely certain. I just know that not at all are these individuals only loyal to, their sort of position in government and this, they clearly are entirely insulated due to the fact that they are affiliated with an organization of powerful influence behind the scenes, right? And I think that's one of the most important aspects of a lot of this, is that you wouldn't have individuals like an Alexander Haig, right, like a Henry Kissinger, if they weren't entirely affiliated with, right, the P2 and these
Absolutely,
these various...
They got to have top cover, right? They got to have top
Exactly.
cover, right, for their operations, and to get into to not get arrested in Mexico with all those smuggling C4 and blasting caps, right? Like Barry Seal
Exactly,
did, right?
dude. But
So if I may circle us back to Idaho in these matters, sir, and we close things out there in Idaho in this discussion. I do appreciate your time and joining me to get a little GCD, and I'm way behind on the comments. I'll get there in a second, but we see the direct connections of all this ongoing enterprise as well, from the Manson murders through the O.J. Simpson business and on to Idaho, because we see Mark Furman, Nazi felon Mark Furman, who perjured himself and planted evidence, along with Philip Van Adder. Philip Van Adder was on the scene at the Tate House in '69 as a rookie officer. The first officer on scene of the Tate Polanski murders was just happened to be a man by the name of Richard Wally. He was the first man on scene at Bundy Drive for the Nicole Brown Simpson, Ron Goldman murders. Shock.
Wow.
So Philip Van Adder is also the man who arrests Roman Polanski in '77 for that rape of the 13-year-old on Jack Nicholson's couch, where Cocaine Bob tried to clean up the mess. And we see the same core group of folks perpetrating around the Orenthal James Sampson case, including Carl Colby's son as a primary witness for the state. And, Mark Furman, though, he's been commenting in Idaho over how Brian Koberger did it, right? And we see the propaganda game was strong in the OJ case here, where they made him real dark to make folks think this was a black versus white thing, right? Which was the goal, ultimately the goal of a plan that involved Mark Furman's friends, and it was hatched out of that Hayden Lake compound. And we learned about this in a study from 1996 by an author named Stephen Wirth. And if I may play this clip to kind of set the stage for that.
This book is about a white supremacist plot to murder Nicole Brown Simpson, to frame O.J. Simpson for the murder, and in turn to use this event to divide the races in the United States, to discredit and alter the judicial system, and to discredit law enforcement, the LAPD in particular, and also to polarize law enforcement officers and to recruit them into the white supremacist camp.
So Mark Furman was connected to that compound as late as the 80s when they did a domestic tour campaign of robbing banks, murdering folks, including that radio host Alan Berg in Denver in 1984.
What the fuck, man?
All hatched out of that compound, and that was actually depicted in a recent Hollywood film again. They like telling their stories, Austin. They like bragging about it, I think.
Right. Yeah, man. That's very clear. I think it's interesting to me because that's running almost parallel with the PatCon operation, right? Like, why would you be trying to drive individuals into this ideological sort of trap, that seems to be a way to push forward the total information awareness agenda, which would lead to the dystopian nature of course, post OKC bombing, we get the precursor to the Patriot Act, right? And all of
the
that.
Joe Biden sponsored act, right?
100%, buddy. Yeah, and there's no way in hell that that wasn't all by design to put us on honestly, to just place us firmly on the path to this sort of totalitarian dystopian vision and agenda that's just playing out in every way. And it seems like, unfortunately, we're all just kind of placed on the political spectrum, falling into certain camps and certain political ideologies that are just oversaturated with these false narratives and misconceptions intended to paint you into a corner and position you into this sort of vulnerable mindset and psychology, to where now you will fall into that very preordained outcome, which will facilitate the rise of that dystopian agenda. And that's, in every way, that's what they attempt to sort of, it's manufacturing consent, but at a level to where it's legitimately kind of seeding the in my mind, when you're able to kind of socially engineer this expectation where people are legitimately expecting, so it's as far as like expecting these individual outcomes to take place, which therefore further reinforces this ideological prison which you reside in, unbeknownst to yourself. Shackles invisible, to the vast majority. And I think that's what happens to us so very often. And that's why I push back so heavily on so many of these ridiculous, just mainstream narratives that clearly are just a tactic of misdirection attempted to deceive us, and so, yeah, I think that if
those are all fantastic points for sure.
Thank you, buddy.
I think that's what we see when we see these PACON operations, right? And then we see the epicenter of activity around some of those PACON operations with Bo Gritz, Randy Weaver, Colby Squares. Oh, and it's all coming around that same Hayden Lake compound where all of the stuff like the Nicole Brown Simpson. So according to that book, Blood Oath, this terror campaign was supposed to coincide with the 10-year anniversary of murder of Alec Berg in June of 1984, when they murdered Nicole Brown Simpson in 94. And they apparently that ended with the OKC bombing. So it literally ties directly into the PACON stuff. And again, it's all these matters we've been discussing tonight, and they all coalesce up there in northern Idaho, where 3 of the Idaho 4 victims are within the immediate vicinity of that former compound.
Yeah. Yeah. And that to me, like whenever you look at the apparent connections to Randy Weaver as far as the Aryan Nations and what they were claiming was an association with the I believe it was the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord is one of the other sort of kind of chapters or Aryan Nations affiliated groups that were very much under this umbrella, where they were accusing Randy of being directly affiliated with that group, but it was only because he had gone to this Aryan Nations compound and ATF informants were there and had infiltrated this organization. And so I think that's also very interesting, because it was during his first and only appearance, right, when Randy Weaver, whenever he actually attends this compound, right, I believe it was trying to remember now, I think it was in 92, I believe. The prosecutor cited this 85 letter that
correct.
Yeah, that basically is sort of confirms the reality of this alleged Frank Kumnick, which is this individual who invited Weaver, right, to this sort of like, I believe it was in 86 that it was referenced when he was introduced to this ATF informant. And it was at a meeting at the Aryan Nations compound. And so that's kind of an interesting place for him to then be set on this very strange path of creating this interesting relationship dynamic with this obvious federal agent, and he claims,
for sure.
I mean, Weaver had been invited by this individual. I believe it was the individual was named Frank Kumnick. That was the individual who was the priority target. He was the initial target, allegedly, of the federal operation. Yeah, it is really great. But that was the problem, is that apparently this guy who was the actual agent and informant himself. His name was Gus Magisono, I believe, and it was an alias for Kenneth Fadley, who's an undercover BATF informant, and had infiltrated himself within the Aryan nations, and was introducing himself to Frank Kumnick because they viewed him to be a weapons dealer, right? And I find that very interesting. And Jose's in the chat. He's like, holy balls, Marion Petty, Civil Air Patrol connections as far as his son. That is fascinating, right? Like, honestly, man, that is something that
now I got to look at his family tree, right? After Oswald and Seal, you know what I mean? I got to look at Petty's now, see what, because I think these folks are born into it, man. I really do. I think that's a lot of the circumstances we're looking at. Not, it's so much. There's exceptions to the rule, obviously, right? But I think it is the rule.
Absolutely. But so much of it, I think, is sort of like these strange, dynastic families that are a part of this sort of what seems to be a cabal that is very much behind the scenes, behind the curtain at the very least, in terms of the general public being able to acknowledge their existence. And I think that in no way is it surprising that you would have this genetic factor that right would present itself, especially when you think about how these sex trafficking operations work fundamentally. I think I always refer to Regina Loof and her grandmother bringing her into the unfortunate sadistic abuse network, where they would utilize her to obviously procure other children, which is just a disgusting concept. But it was legitimately what happens is you're consistently seeing this familial connection and association to these unfortunate victims, where from childhood they're placed into this unfortunate position. And usually, I think for the most part, I mean, she herself, she had, at the very least, she had over 60 alters. I think it was more than that, if I remember. It was a very high number of alternate personalities.
You ain't kidding, man.
Yeah,
you ain't. Those are the real victims. Those, what you're saying, right? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
100%. But I just think it's whenever you figure out what inevitably took place to kind of set the sort of stage for what happened to the Weaver family. I mean, it was all over this ridiculous selling these sawed-off shotguns to this undercover agent Gus Magisono, who was technically Kenneth Fadley, and this all occurred when he's legitimately he's attempting to inquire and ask Randy if he could find a way to somehow get his hands on a minigun, right? Which I always thought that was one of the funniest things. Like, would that not just instantly raise red flags for you if you had just kind of been developing this relationship over time? But it had been like, a few years. I think it was up to 3 years they had been developing a relationship at that time, right? And so I did find it very interesting at that point that it was all over this $300 transaction where he legitimately.
Well, that's what they claim, right?
Where he claims it was all over the 1/8 of an inch for these sawed-off shotguns. It's all ridiculous in terms of staging the narrative, right? But I do think, it's important to understand that obviously this is potentially a narrative that's been presented to the public, and we've all sort of unfortunately, taken it at face value in certain ways.
Go.
But because I do
matters
think
of national security.
Exactly. Because I do think that, understanding that there's legitimate allegations out there that are claiming that there are sleeper cells of what were Green Berets, sleeper cells of who effectively received mind control experimentation and basically had undergone these mind control operations while it was a part of their essentially a part of their special forces training, right? They were placed into this well-established clandestine group that was going to function in a domestic network, where they were a part of technically they were running domestic operations stateside, but they were also international in scope as well. So they were clearly running like covert, clandestine, let's say drug trafficking and arms smuggling flights out of the U.S. to certain locations.
Sounds like the mix of Gladio, Air America, and the Phoenix program, Colby Squares.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And so, yeah, I think that when in terms of they said that they were planning on using that essentially the individuals at Waco even, right, were potentially they had like a chemical weapons device that they were attempting to create, right, and that they were building this device based on their prior programming, and there were at least 7 sleepers within the Waco compound, and they were in the inner circle of Koresh himself, and that these sleepers were in the process of constructing a chemical weapons device they were going to utilize in Oklahoma City that would kill up to 350,000 people. This is apparently a project that they were attempting to utilize, which would provide much more of a precedent-setting operation if it actually did go, get fully greenlit. And that in
that's
itself,
wild, dude. I was not familiar with that, but we see all that being hatched again. Well, it's Pac-On stuff. Back to Randy Weaver, back to Bo Gritz, back to the Hayden Lake compound, in the epicenter of all of these Colby's activities, the Colby Squares, we see represented here with Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh is friends with the Keogh brothers and the white nationalists from the compound on the bank robbery runs and murder and gun robberies and whatnot. Dude. And they're friends with Israel Key. So we see the serial killer. So we see the epicenter of all of these programs right here.
Wow. That is amazing. And you consider the CIA operative Gunther Russbacher, who Gunther Russbacher blew me away, the Paul Wiltshire report, right, that I had mentioned before.
Please.
And so this connects back to the Weavers, which is just fascinating. And especially if you consider how they claimed that the Davidians were technically they were utilizing the Branch Davidians as an organization. They were attempting to utilize them in similar ways as that of Aum Shinrikyo, the cult in Japan, that they wanted to essentially utilize this group to commit terrorist acts similar to the sarin gas attack in the Japanese subway system that they had released, that cult that I think has far more strange connections when you start, kind of like pulling back those layers. But yeah, this Paul Wiltshire, right? These letters that he sent to Attorney General Janet Reno, this fascinated me because in no way was I expecting this. I always felt like maybe there was more to Waco. That's what I always felt, right? It just seems like this just doesn't seem right as much as I hope. I hate to say it that way because I don't hope that the official narrative is not that the official narrative is actually fully accepted in terms of like what happened to the Davidians and during the siege. But you consider, all the psychological operations they were running on the Davidians during the siege, right? And using what, like Buddhist chants and rabbits being slaughtered, all these insane sounds that they were utilizing for psychological warfare.
Yeah, it sounds like some Michael Aquino shit. And if you recall in our Order of the Solar Temple cult discussion, the cult leaders over there were concerned on videotape recorded saying the Branch Davidians beat them to the punch.
I know.
Whatever that means.
When I saw that, it opened my mind to other possibilities even more, right? Because I just thought, what the fuck? Hold on. That sounds...
Right, dude. That's wild shit, dude.
Especially with their connections to trafficking, not only clearly they're laundering financial,
they're doing hood rat shit. It's a very technical term, but it's hood rat shit.
Dude, hood rat shit for sure. But this is the claim that was put forward in Paul Wiltshire's letter to Attorney Janet Reno. Now, keep in mind that Paul Wiltshire, this is very interesting because he ends up, unfortunately, suicided, right? His body was so clearly moved and placed onto his own toilet in his apartment where he obviously was not murdered. But all of this happened because he became, he was the lawyer, all right, to these whistleblowers who claimed they were running covert operations, one of which was Gunther Karl Russbacher. And Wiltshire inevitably dies in these very skeptical and strange circumstances that are extraordinarily disputed, that show him This is all happening a month after he writes a letter to then new U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno alleging that the CIA was killing people to cover up its mind control experiments and that the Waco incident was one of these events. Now, that made a lot of sense to me because you consider the anti-cult network that sprouts up after all of the cults surface after MK Ultra is driven underground, right, for plausible deniability into all the cult organizations, just like William Holsinger, Congressman Leo Ryan's aide claims was the case with Jonestown. And so to me, that fits everything, especially when I found out about this this rabbi, Maurice Davis, who inevitably, he turns out he just happens to be, in Indianapolis and also in Kentucky, giving Jim Jones his first property, which he would use for the People's Temple, and that just so happened to be his prior synagogue, Rabbi Maurice Davis, who happened to also be a fundamental MK Ultra operative directly under Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the black sorcerer of MK Ultra himself, right? And he's tasked by the ADL. He's tasked by the ADL to run through a federal institution or a medical institution. I can't quite remember now the name of it. But either way, he's tasked with running, these MK Ultra experiments, and then
for sure
he joins Dr. Jolyon Klebold, or Jesus, that's my homie, Dr. Jolly West. Jolyon Klebold's Tim Tuttle. He's my boy. He was our video editor that unfortunately committed murder, and hopefully
I saw that. I didn't know he was your video editor. I saw that case though.
So unfortunately, I occasionally I'll conflate the name because he was. But still,
it sounds like you got a job vacancy. I mean, no offense to him, but it sounds like you got a job vacancy for someone to video.
Well, I did see our new video editor was actually in the chat earlier. It's Jacob from Rise to Liberty. He's a great dude. I love Jacob. He's a good guy.
Oh, dude, he's trying to out JJ me, dude. I told him no one out JJ's me.
That's so fucking funny. Oh man, but I like, isn't that?
Isn't Janet Reno a sexy gal? Isn't she a sexy gal?
That's too funny. She even threatens that, hey, if she doesn't get reappointed, she's going to blow off the lid of what really happened at Waco. She legitimately says this at one point, which blew me away that was a part of the story. And you have Paul Wiltshire. He says that he has more information than Danny Castellero, right? And he claims this all happens to do with the controversial October surprise allegations and the Inslaw Octopus case, which clearly, if you know of the case management software, which was deliberately given a back door on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, according to Michael Riconosciuto, right? Well,
I'm glad you brought that up because I'd like to maybe put a pin for the next time we have a discussion, sir, because there's not very many public filings in this Idaho 4 case, but the defense counsel for Brian Koberger filed in January of this year complaining about the prosecutor's use and or abuse of a prosecutor management information system AI software.
Jesus.
And holy smokes, did the Kill Bill sirens in my head go off, buddy. I'll tell you what.
That is crazy, man. Like, I think that Idaho has to be a strategic hub, just as Utah seems to be utilized in this fashion in many ways, right? Because I think that it has something to do with
you're talking about if I may, sir, you're talking about Kolob's country right there. You're talking about Elohim's country. He's from Kolob. He's
exactly
the Mormon god. So back in the day here, a lot of these folks who pioneered over America and settled this land, they were going to Deseret, not America. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. But what do you think about the the Christian identity movement that allegedly Weaver? Well, but before we
that's a great question because we'll go back to this Hayden Lake stuff, Bo Gritz and Randy Weaver there, because I have something else for you in regards to the Christian identity movement directly related to Moscow, Idaho. Right?
Oh shit!
Give me 1 second. This guy's great, dude. I'm pretty sure his father was Office of Naval Intelligence. He was an Annapolis grad.
Of course,
he's fantastic, dude. The Secretary of Defense right now is Pete Hegseth is a member of one of this guy's churches.
You do this.
Oh my god!
Bulls.
I love this guy. He's fantastic.
Don't let them feed you. Don't take the bait. Don't play with fire, but burn whatever bridges you need to burn.
It's a little bit of the environment there in Moscow with some weird activities again. So he's the head of the it's a Calvinist movement of Reformed churches, and the pastor that Hegseth is from in Tennessee is one of his pastors.
Interesting.
But they're considered part of that movement, Christian nationalists. He's written a couple of books on the topic. They're not Hayden Lake Christian nationalists, but I think they share a lot of. I don't mean to keep doing this. I think they share a lot of similar ideology. Let's leave it at that.
That makes sense. I know that. I should probably at the very least finish the point I was attempting to make in terms of.
Please do. I apologize for stopping that.
Oh no.
You brought up Christian identity. I couldn't stop with Doug Wilson.
Dude, I fully got off course in the first place, so it's not your fault, brother. But yeah, I think that Paul Wiltshire, the origin of these sort of claims that exist in terms of the Gunther Russbacher covert CIA operative connection there to not only Waco but to potentially to Ruby Ridge as well, and Oklahoma City, because they were claiming this is all a part of this layered operation that's being conducted at the time domestically within the U.S. And it was all for an attempted, goal of manufacturing a crisis, to clearly pave the way for, as we mentioned before, dystopian measures that were already attempting to be set in place, but clearly had no real consent among the general public. And so you had this individual, Paul Wiltshire, who starts blowing the whistle. Yep. He starts sending these letters, and he is legitimately killed and placed in the fetal position. Rigor mortis already set in. He's brought back to his apartment, placed on the actual toilet in his residence. They attempted to make it look like this was a naturally occurring death, and also tried to stage it as a suicide. But his body legitimately was just it had fallen over and was in it was so very clearly moved and placed in this position that you had so many different people who were extraordinarily raising a lot of different questions in terms of how this actually played out. But it gets very interesting, because it turns out that whenever it was a large report that he presented to Janet Reno, but this report claims that David Koresh has this very extensive CIA background and happened to be a sleeper who had been subjected to CIA mind control training and programming, claiming that Waco is a major center for such CIA mind control experimentation and programming at this time, utilizing what they refer to as the CIA's Leadership Management Institute, the LMI in Waco. And they name these, and this is interesting to me and something that I brought up a couple of different times. This is Paul Wiltshire, right? And
this was the attorney's. This was his letter to Will Ferrell,
to Janet Reno. To Will Ferrell, exactly. And it names not only the LMI in Waco, but it names other strategic mind control experimentation hubs where all of this was coalescing, all of this mind control activity. And among the other locations were Lake City, Utah, Logan, Utah, Provo, Utah, Boise, Idaho, and San Francisco, California. So I thought that the Utah and Idaho locations were very interesting, especially considering, not only Randy Weaver, not only the Ted Bundy cases that occurred as well, which seemed very similar in terms of a lot of the kind of socially engineered, manufactured narratives at the time that fell perfectly into the kind of ideological trap being laid, and so they claimed that obviously the CIA was sponsoring all of these various cults, and that the Delta Force was directly implicated in being involved, and apparently there were exactly, and I think that was another one. Not only was Offutt Air Force Base highly involved and directly implicated in running Project Monarch, and many of the because Paul Bonacci himself says, one, he was taken there, and two, he witnessed Michael Aquino, basically, he witnessed Larry King passing a briefcase to Michael Aquino at Offwood Air Force Base as if it were some sort of transaction being done before his eyes. Now, that made perfect sense to me as far as the network and everything pertaining to the Omaha, Nebraska, Franklin Credit Union scandal and everything else that would pop up around that time in geopolitical area. And so, yeah, that not only that, but the final point that we can kind of tie in here is the idea that that these he clearly was saying that by the way, he claims that Russbacher, the covert operative, had essentially explained to him that Randy Weaver was a controlled operative as well. He was a subject that ended up out of control, was how it was described to him. And he claims that there were members of the SEAL team that he was introduced to prior to his death, and it's over 100-page report that he sends to Janet Reno. It's a crazy. It provides all these backgrounds for mind control operations and experimentations that were at that point they had yet to be fully exposed.
I don't know that I've read. I'm familiar with Paul Wiltshire. I'm familiar with some of these narratives. I don't know if I've ever read the full report. So if you
oh man,
write me that link to that, I'll make sure it goes in the show notes.
I'll send it to you, buddy, and I'll wrap this up really quickly because
you're good, dude. You're good. I just want to make sure we circle back because I want to answer your question on that motive, but I want to make sure we laid all these connections with all the PatCon stuff and that Hayden Lake compound, because we see in this document. I'll let you finish, but I just want to tie that around before I didn't forget about the motive. I got a good motive for you.
Hell yeah, brother. Yeah, I know that what was described to Paul Wiltshire by Gunther Russbacher, this covert CIA operative, who, by the way, I did mention he's the individual responsible for the he claims to be the person responsible for flying obviously the October surprise. Russbacher claims he was the individual responsible for flying George Bush Sr. to Paris during the hostage crisis, as well as William Casey and all of the other future CIA directors, like Robert Gates was involved. You had it's kind of crazy. There were at least 5 Navy SEALs who were on board apparently as well, and you had, of course, numerous Secret Service agents, which to me, the Secret Service is highly involved and implicated in the cover-up of many of these, scandals that occur. But, that's for really another time at this point. But anyway, so
dude, you're making some excellent points, man. I like your style and all these things because again, we're drawing smaller circles around a smaller crowd, in my opinion. And
exactly.
When we see Bo Gritz, Special Forces Major Bo Gritz, settling the dispute with Randy Weaver, and then we see him as this is Bo Gritz, one of Colby's queers. And we see him then also as the undercover. This is courtesy of Troublemaker Jonah in the chat in our discussion a couple weeks ago on these matters. He brought this to my attention, as we can now determine based upon the references here in these. This is the Sovereign Order of St. John documents, not the FBI record on PatCon. But we see that Bo Gritz is an undercover agent for FBI for PatCon, courtesy of these documents. Because they have it blanked out, but it says it's the man who settled the Randy Weaver Ruby Ridge, and we know that's Bo Gritz. And then we can play I like to play Mad Libs, with these redacted documents, try to guess the actual answer, right?
Yeah. Now, man, it would just be very interesting if because Bo Gritz, right, just his take on Jonestown, it always struck me as a why would he come out publicly with this, and I wasn't quite certain what the motive would have been, but I mean, for him to say that basically it became a cleanup operation and they started utilizing the reason that the death count seemed to rise so extraordinarily at the beginning of the reports coming out of Guyana, they claim now. I believe that the official narrative, right? Yeah, the official narrative is so ridiculous because they're just like the Guyanese can't count. That's basically what they say. But Bo Gritz claims that and also they were saying, that they were counting multiple bodies or counting bodies twice at times because they were stacked on top of each other and certain, I don't know, it's ridiculous. But it turns out that what Bo Gritz was claiming is that, what actually occurred at Jonestown happened to be, and by the way, I think it is important to remind everyone who Bo Gritz really is, because he was a, Green Beret Special Forces officer, right? And that's the reason that he knew Randy Weaver personally, allegedly before this, which I found very interesting. The reason why they brought him up there was because they said Randy would actually respect him and potentially listen to him, and due to his former Green Beret Special Forces connection.
Oh, dude, they definitely know each other. They always claim they don't know each other, but they definitely know each other.
Oh, they know each other.
Bo Gritz sings like a canary against everybody, including Ted Shackley, for dealing drugs in this report right here, and I'll put a link in the chat. It's hilarious.
Do you think that he just had a crisis of just like his conscience was eating away, and some people have to feel this way at a certain point and kind of like out of moral concerns attempt to blow the whistle? Don't you think that does happen occasionally, as often as
I think it does happen for sure?
Yeah,
I think it does happen.
Definitely doesn't occur as much as I would hope, but still, I do think that it's he basically says that these bodies from the Montreal experiments, he even says the Montreal Health Institute specifically, he said that they were essentially just kind of brought down to Guyana and basically they just utilized this moment as a cleanup operation and wanted to get rid of certain bodies that wouldn't have any real let's say individuals who are concerned about their well-being and follow up with the potential outcome of what happened to them. And it is interesting how much he refers to Alan Dulles when he's speaking on his theory on Jonestown, right? And he says that it had to self-destruct, the whole mission, right? And that means the death of hundreds of people. He says, as I point out in the book that he had written just recently in this interview, Bo Gritz was trying to promote it. He says the medical examiner there made some startling statements. We wouldn't even allow the bodies to be properly examined when they were brought back to the East Coast and turned in. So obviously it was a cover-up. Jonestown, I think, was an extension of MK Ultra from the CIA, and there are probably other experiments going on. And
would you believe that Michael Aquino was named in a child daycare center's satanic ritual abuse in Ukiah, California in 1987?
Oh, yeah.
The same location Jonestown was before they went Guyana style.
Dude, he was running roughshod over Ukiah at that time. Like, legitimately had People's Temple members who were running the local. Essentially, he's getting welfare checks just written straight up. Like, he was just seizing a lot of these, financial avenues at the time. And I didn't realize that he had so much influence over the local.
Yeah, dude. What's Michael Aquino doing up there then, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, that is fascinating. And I think the final point I really had on the Russbacher connection there was just that that he was claiming that these basically these sleepers, right, had attempted to reject their programming at a certain point and began to wake up, right, and their programming was to make and deliver this biological chemical device that could kill everyone in a city the size of Oklahoma City or Houston, and that this information was received by their handlers stating the program had been accidentally triggered and that the 7 sleepers had started building this device. So this is
one of those mistakes you're talking about, right? These things have errors, right?
Exactly. And so they had claimed, Russbacher even claimed that you had individual CIA operatives, and apparently Delta Force was obviously present at Jonestown, or not Jonestown, I mean at Waco, which is a very important aspect of this as well. And
brag again.
Exactly. And in terms of Ruby Ridge, right? I mean, it made a little bit more sense as to why the priority target at Ruby Ridge was Vicky Weaver, because I mean they legitimate as far as like they blame her for the reason that Randy Weaver became an out of control asset. And so yeah, I know. I found that very strange as well. But they
it's very telling, is it not? I mean, it's very telling to what you're describing as this program, right? They want to
definitely.
They're not going to blame themselves for their asset going wrong.
No way. And that's why I think, if this was kind of like an operation gone wrong and they wanted to blow it up and also utilize it as a potential means to experiment on a controlled and isolated group domestically within the confines of the U.S. with an entirely different ideological subset that you could kind of like see how this would affect them. It's almost as if what they did in Jonestown. Here's another strange, as far as like who are the, what profile do they fit? All the victims at Jonestown, right? It's a very strange group of individuals who are prioritized and experimented upon. And especially when you realize that Jonestown was a black site that, that had been very well established to training up Angolan rebels for years prior to this, that CIA operatives had actually gained access to the site itself on behalf of Jim Jones, which is so hilarious. And they have a state-of-the-art medical facility that had so many different, MK Ultra.
That's a repeating pattern too, right? The medical business, right?
100%. They said they could have dosed the entire capital of Guyana. They claim of Georgetown, right? Which is just, it makes a lot of sense, but.
Well, if I may, you have some great details, sir. If I may bring us back to Hayden Lake in our recent events up there before I close us out with some of those motives and the rest of the
do you mind this last statement I have on the Weaver case?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
And then I'll shut up in terms of then we can go straight back to Idaho. But yeah, so Russbacher, he states that Randy Weaver was a program sleeper, indicating that Vicky Weaver had somehow deactivated Randy's programming. And he also seemed to imply that the attack on Ruby Ridge was intended to send a message not only to the Patriot community, but to all sleepers from the Special Forces community.
Oh.
Some of these sleepers realized they had been programmed and were trying to find this. Man, this is crazy, right? They were trying to find the sleeper program and deactivate it. So Russbacher said this was happening in some of the men who had been programmed during the Vietnam War Phoenix program, baby. I mean, like, how is that not exactly what that is? So I don't know.
Like Richard Ramirez's guardian and cousin, that kind of like that guy who worked for the Phoenix program.
Exactly. So that's really, I mean, we could keep going, but that I think is one of the most important.
That's great shit, because Timothy McVeigh claimed to have some sort of something up his rectum. Did he not?
He claims he had a dental implant that was essentially behaving as some sort of mind-controlled microchip, and this was a claim that he had made to a death row inmate, I believe, Paul David Hammer. I always fucking forget his name. It's a strange name, but it's a very. Go ahead.
Did he not tell his sister also some message that he was smuggling drugs in Mena, Arkansas style, and he had some sort of tracking device butt plug?
Absolutely. Yeah. Honestly,
that's wild shit, dude. That's a wild. I mean, it's from his sister, though, right? If he's going to tell anybody, he's probably going to tell his sister.
You would think. And I utilized the Tim McVeigh New York Times article that details a lot of what his sister and mother were claiming, right? Which it seemed to ring perfectly true in my opinion, right? And especially when he says. Basically, after he returns to the Gulf, from the Gulf War, right? He's going through a special forces training, and he's essentially kind of called forward. After he goes through this special forces elite Green Beret, training, and then he's essentially. What they claim is that he washed out of special forces, but I think that was the sheep dipped narrative they're attempting to provide. And so, yeah, he says that he inevitably, this is a personal letter McVeigh wrote to his sister, and it was dated October 20th, 93. And I always found it crazy interesting because he definitely suggests that what happened to him was he went covert black ops, domestically, and was attempting to, and this is crazy. He says he told his grandpa this, right? That Grandpa McVeigh saw this. He never knew why, but one day I showed up at his door, freezing outside in only sweatpants and in total complete breakdown. Gramps, I'm sure, never told anyone about that day, and I respect him greatly for that, as I spent about an hour upstairs losing it. It was almost suicide at that point, but rage, but denial, but acceptance. All these feelings were battling for control. Now here's what led to my current life. It all revolves around my arrival at Fort Bragg for Special Forces. We all took intelligence, psychological adeptness, and a whole battery of other tests out of a group of 400. One day in formation, 10 social security numbers were called out, no names, and told to leave formation. Mine was one. The 10 of us were told that out of the select group of 400 men, we had scored highest on certain tests. We had been selected because of our intelligence, physical makeup, and physical abilities. We were to feel special, part of a hand-picked group. We were all asked to volunteer, to do some work for the government on the domestic as well as international front. What I learned next, both from the briefings and from the questions and private talks, included we would be helping the CIA fly drugs into the U.S. to fund many covert operations. Military consultants were to work hand in hand with civilian police agencies to quiet anyone who was deemed a security risk. We would be paid government assassins. That's what he fucking tells her, dude.
That's literally what we're describing. I've never heard that before. He told his grandfather that?
Yeah, and this is a letter he wrote to
Austin,
his
you just blew up my brain hole, dude. That's every program we just talked about in a story from what, McVeigh to his grandfather, huh?
Yeah, man.
Holy
yeah.
smokes.
Yeah, it's so plain and obvious, and that he was sheep dipped, right? And it goes so far as to claim that, as a colonel in the U.S. Air Force and chief of special operations, obviously the guy who was represented in the JFK in the JFK Oliver Stone film, right, as the Mr. X or whatever the fuck it. Who's that? It's escaping my name right now for some reason. I'm forgetting the name
Colonel,
of the actor.
Air Force Colonel.
L. Fletcher Prouty, right? That's
Yes,
it.
sir.
And so he basically explains what sheep dipped is. And I think people need to understand that this is an intricate Army devised process by which a man who is in the service as a full career soldier or officer agrees to go through all the legal and official motions of resigning from the service. Then, rather than actually being released, his records are pulled from the Army personnel files, transferred to a special Army intelligence file. Now, substitute but nonetheless real appearing records are then processed, and the man leaves the service, right? He is encouraged to write to friends and give a cover reason why he got out. He goes to his bank and charge card services and changes his status to civilian and does the hundreds of other official and personal things that any man would do if he really had gotten out of the service. Meanwhile, his real Army records are kept in secrecy, but not forgotten. And that's exactly what happened to Tim McVeigh in my mind. And as far as when you consider, him showing up at Waco and he's passing out flyers, right? Like, does that not feel like what a sheep dipped asset would do? It's like, it's so very obvious to me.
I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. In that conversation with Jonah I was talking about before, the other undercover agent on the FBI PACON documents is listed as an active duty special forces troop. I think that's Timothy McVeigh.
Oh man, fits perfectly to me.
Yeah, his name fits the Mad Libs.
Does it
really? I played Mad Libs with the document. You know what I mean? It makes sense, right?
Interesting. That is interesting. I know. It was always. I think it was Terry Nichols. I think it was Terry Nichols who basically said that he mentioned the major, right? Which I always found interesting because he said that McVeigh went off script. Basically, well, he didn't go off script, but he was given an alternative target right? Where they were going to actually prioritize the target, because he had and by the way, it was I believe Larry Potts was the individual that was named by Nichols, because he said that McVeigh was extremely upset and angry, and what he believed was an accidental slip of the tongue. McVeigh reveals to him the identity of a high-ranking FBI official who was apparently directing him during the plot. He says the name McVeigh let slip was Larry Potts, who happened to be the lead FBI agent overseeing the PatCon operation at Ruby Ridge. McVeigh said he believed Potts was manipulating him and forcing him to go off script, which he understood, Nichols, meant to change the target of the bombing. So that was the only time, he says, he ever heard McVeigh refer to Larry Potts. And Larry Potts obviously did not only supervise the Waco massacre and the siege at Ruby Ridge, but he had also been directly implicated in supervising the FBI's PatCon operation, and was almost immediately after the 95 bombing promoted to deputy director of the FBI. So that, I think, is really important. And
that's the motivation, right?
100%, buddy. Yeah. I just don't see how, like, I think it was, I believe it was the death row inmate that he served time with, right? Because that made one of the most extraordinary claims of it all. It was David Paul Hammer. I was right. Okay. I knew, I always want to say Paul David Hammer, but yeah, so it was David Paul Hammer.
Dude, I'm horrible with names, man. As long as you get it near, I think that's good. It's like horseshoes, as long as you're close, right?
Right, exactly. But he says that, and this is, I mean, he said we should question the reality of McVeigh's execution, right? That's legitimately it. He's claiming, he says that McVeigh told us many times, and he would vacillate on this issue from time to time, but his main thing was that he was not going to be executed, that the major was going to have someone infiltrate the execution team, and that he would be given drugs that would feign the appearance of death. And he says the CIA and other people used these drugs, and that they would be taken out, and he would be given some kind of medication that would counteract the other, and that he would be rewarded for serving his country. And yeah, I think the story of Janie Coverdale, who's the witness that watched the execution of Tim McVeigh, there were multiple people that witnessed the execution, but she herself, he says that McVeigh was covered from toe to toe, or toe to neck, I mean, couldn't see any IV lines running into his veins. And so she says that she doesn't know if he was executed or not. And she watched him. She says there were some strange sort of breathing, that as far as like some sort of what looked to appear as if it were him lightly breathing still underneath the sheet. But yeah, she said
for sure. And then they gave the old hucklebuck on the hearse, right? They drove out a fake hearse and said, like, we smuggled them out a different direction.
Misdirection. Yeah, I know they misdirect and provide a fake hearse and transport the body in covertly. Now, this is all the while that the entire time McVeigh is on death row. He's fighting against his own father, his biological father's ability to essentially have an autopsy and of his remains post execution, which is like legitimately it's not anything that typically occurs, right? This is 100% out of the ordinary, right? And so I think
for sure, dude, for sure.
It's just amazing.
Can I offer you this correlation between the McVeigh case? I think the whole magic show around his death should be questioned, right? Should definitely be questioned. And again, I think he might have been an undercover agent, so that really brings in things into different questions, huh? And as you said, a sheep dip special forces guy, I totally agree with you there, sir. Exactly. So would you believe the judge in the Idaho 4 murder trial 2 weeks ago, when denying the defense's motions for alternate perpetrators to be introduced to trial, he quoted the McVeigh case as far as denying their motion. I'm not an attorney, sir. I'm also not the vice president. Somewhere right there. And I don't know that federal cases are relevant in state cases. They hold no bearing and they have no jurisdiction, to my understanding. But here we go with Idaho Contra.
That's amazing, man. I think they had PatCon groups all over the country, and I think that they've just, I imagine, rebranded the name of the covert operation and kind of at least advanced their sophisticated methods in terms of modernizing them, updating them for the current environment politically. I think that's always what's happening. So it's not as if, and this is why I always like to remind everyone, including myself, like MK Ultra never ended. Iran Contra never ended, right? Like, and
for sure,
it's only been rebranded, and of course they have. I mean, we can get into. I mean, obviously we don't have time at this moment, but I'm just saying, as far as the crypto dynamic with the element of what crypto represents in terms of how, even in its infancy, the blockchain. Who created the blockchain? I believe that inherently it was a compromised a vision for dystopian reasons, for a cashless society, for an attempt to create a digital dollar, and in every way. And now that doesn't mean I don't
disagree at all.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean I don't appreciate like a philosophical, for example, Monero or XRP, which is like a pirate crypto, which claims to be fully, at least at the very least, peer-to-peer and privately. It just, but still, you have to have a digital footprint to kind of exercise this framework of this sort of dystopian financial framework, and that in itself, is very much, it raises red flags and creates a lot of skepticism for me personally, and I think it's just another tool for the ultimate overall agenda of. Obviously, and that we're witnessing as far as the pivot to technocracy in real time. So why wouldn't they utilize FTX for a laundering, money laundering operation? But also, why was if you saw the Ukraine connection to FTX, right? I mean, it's just like that alone.
Well, that's one of the things that's keeping the lid on Idaho Contra, is all that taxpayer money funneled through FTX. So FTX buys this rural bank in Washington. Now, there's some machinations beforehand that involved the University of Idaho president, Scott Green. He was running the law firm he left that law firm to take over the president at the University of Idaho. At the same time, they start paying off a Washington banking regulator to allow them mash together cash for crypto in their little fraud system, right? The FDIC got paid off and looked the other way. So I can look back and see these machinations happening now. So that same law firm, from the former law firm that Scott Green ran, he was a COO and CFO for many years. They were handling the merger between Binance and FTX that failed on November 9th.
Oh my God.
Thus causing FTX to file emergency bankruptcy on November 11th, thus causing the entire world, including now the FDIC, pulled their head out their ass and suddenly cared about the situation. They're like, oh, how is this rural bank in Idaho that Sam Bankman-Fried secretly bought with this creepy French dude who's connected to all sorts of creepy stuff, including the inventor of Inspector Gadget, Jean Chalopin.
Oh my God, man.
And he's connected to BCCI. So you see, and they're like, oh, how did this happen? And they're clearly doing a cash for crypto scam. I looked at their FDIC reports. The month they buy the place, their deposits increased over 1,000%. So now no one's getting charged for this, much like Sam Bankman-Fried's Sally, P. Diddy. They have the same attorneys too, by the way. No one's getting charged for this cash for crypto.
Dude, absolutely not. And Diddy's just, honestly, this is just an entire, the Diddy case can almost perfectly represent kind of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial in my mind in many ways, except also it was just a little bit more appealing to the wider public due to the celebrity influence of it all and that factoring in, because clearly that's what the American public actually care about, is essentially they worship the celebrity nature of things, and that's all it's a very strange dynamic. But I'm realizing what actually holds the attention of the average person, and it's not at all like these covert clandestine connections that are layered and take a lot of just effort in order to attempt to understand. And
Austin, there was folks spreading baby oil on themselves outside the verdict of the Diddy trial.
I know, bro. It's the craziest thing ever. And what are they saying now after this fucking ridiculous Epstein copium false transparency fake disclosure.
Well,
I mean,
well, no, sir. Clearly, Jeffrey Epstein's a fool. He murdered himself when there was no evidence against him.
And we should free that poor woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, because she's
a travesty of justice.
Because she's obviously a victim of.
He's sex trafficked to nobody. There's no clients there.
Exactly, man. Yeah, it's just fascinating to watch. But we live in
we
very
see Sam
strange
Bankman-Fried
times.
Selly, who has the same attorneys as P. Diddy, who's still pending some charges allegedly. He made an emergency stop to Idaho right before his arrest.
Oh my God.
Would you believe?
That's nuts, man.
So as far as the motive goes, sir, so we see all these connections with this bank. So there's a large-scale, long-term drug trafficking problem on the campuses of Washington State and the University of Idaho involving the sororities and the fraternities. So that house in specific, the murder house, appears to have been long-term serving as a drug distribution point for circa 20 years.
Jesus.
The occupants of the home, to understand the victimology, look at the occupants of the home. Operation GCD, Operation Garbage Can, dude. It also means greatest common denominator, because when I ran a private detective agency, that's what I named it, the GCD Detective Agency, because that's the way I look at crime and situations. I break it down. What's the greatest common denominator? Well, the four victims were all left their fraternities and their fraternity and sororities, and the two surviving roommates were still members. So that's an imperative note to take when you consider all these shenanigans at hand.
My God, man. So
one of those roommates was called back, Kaylee Gonzalez. The man, her father was the man with the national security comment with Ashley Banfield. She's called back to Moscow because she's already left campus. Again, the other roommates appear to also be leaving, the ones that were now dead. So it seems like that if this drug trafficking operations were suddenly laundering their money through Sam Bankman-Fried's cash for crypto scam, just 45 minutes north of both campuses, the one that Scott Green already had connections to, the University of Idaho president, who's friends with Leon Black from BCCI scandal, right? That's his buddy. Scott Green and Leon Black went into business together to try to take over the University of Phoenix, and folks had to literally shut it down by lawsuit.
My God.
Yeah. So he's in the mix. Jeffrey Epstein's buddy Leon Black's in the mix, right? BCCI guy, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like that Binance FTX merger failed on November 9th with Scott Green's old law firm. November 10th, the surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen drives 2 hours north near that Hayden Lake compound and invites Kaylee Gonzalez back to campus, back to that house. November 11th, FTX files emergency bankruptcy. Everyone finds out they bought that small rural bank and was doing a cash for crypto scam. And then the FDIC was like, oh, we just found out, we're new, we don't know what to do. And the Fed seized it like 6 weeks later. But if you look at the chain of events, the four murders occur within 36 hours of everyone finding out there's a money laundering operation in that small rural bank in Washington State.
Yeah. That's
so. If you got loose ends, you got four folks that are already on the run. They're leaving the campus. They've already quit their organizations. They've lost your trust. They're a liability.
My God. Now this all fits perfectly with SBF's parents and their connections to the CIA. Basically, I mean, he basically had a handler that he was directly affiliated with during his time at attending college, who legitimately went and gave speeches at his university where he had direct conversations and discussions with SBF, and so he directly was molded for his position as the patsy, which he would later become. Because I honestly think it was just, again, this is low hanging fruit. He was providing some sort of just, again, it's a money laundering operation, but there's so many other aspects of the enterprise that are being, facilitated through money laundering operations such as this.
Oh, for sure.
So, yeah.
Well, he hires Leon Black's attorneys from the BCCI Drexel Burnham Lambert scandal.
Wow.
Sam Bankman-Fried's the perfect fool. He's a perfect patsy. He's a moron. He accounted for the largest loss in one of the oldest Wall Street firms, the largest loss in a single day just a few years ago. This is one of the oldest firms. That's a lot of time they've been trading. You know who worked there with him? One of the Zizians.
Oh my God. What
True
the
story.
hell, dude?
It's a very small firm.
That is so crazy. It is such a small world, my friend. Like, honestly, like you talk about the individuals in proximity to the levers of power I mean, it's just it is that it is just kind of like a honestly, it's just the usual suspects, but it's like it's just a crazy thing to witness personally, you know, and as in terms of who all is involved and how often they seem to, you never realize they're directly connected, you know, and then, yeah, it inevitably reveals itself over time. And so
it's the same folks. Special Forces, John Michael Hand, when this bank failed, which Michael Riconosciuto takes credit for, but that's a horse of a different color. Yeah, so when this bank failed, John Michael Hand, the founder, Green Beret Special Forces, one of Colby's queers, disappears to Idaho under a presumed identity for the next 35 years. Bill Colby was on the board of this bank when it failed.
Oh, yeah. Nuggan Hand is so ridiculous. I mean, it ties directly to Son of Sam, which I didn't realize until I was doing.
I learned that from you, sir. I listened to you talking about that. Please indulge us all. That's an interesting connection.
Crazy. Yeah. I just like finding out that Donna Loria and Jody Valenti were effectively, you know, tied into Nuggan Hand due to the what they were exploiting was essentially this kind of smuggling these illegal substances through these U.S. blood supplies, right? So they were importing them and through these ambulance technicians who were finding out about this domestic operation where it was being smuggled through the U.S., usually surrounding these military bases such as Fort Bragg. But Loria herself, exactly, and Loria herself was potentially targeted. A possible motive that she was targeted due to her role as an ambulance technician who was exposed to this drug ring that involved Nuggan Hand Bank that was importing heroin from the Golden Triangle and Thailand as well into the U.S. through these blood supplies. So she discovers this and is then directly targeted in the Son of Sam case. And effectively, by the way, you can tie that perfectly into a few, not very much time passes, and then the Process Church, after going underground after the Son of Sam case is exposed, they prop back up in Atlanta, right? And you have a direct link to Iran Contra facilitating a drug trafficking ring through Hartsfield International Airport, which also they were trafficking and smuggling weapons as well. So this was an arms trafficking operation that was connected with the Atlanta case. And that's crazy because it's once again illicit CIA
too, right?
Do what?
I got a delay going. I apologize. That's a standard move, though, right? With the gun trafficking as well, right?
100%.
We saw that around Waco with the Midwest Depot. So if I just point this out here, with the John Michael Fuller disappeared into Idaho Falls, Idaho for 35 years after that bank collapse. So he was found out by a fellow by the name of Butt. Imagine being this badass special forces officer who, you know, concocted this international bank collapse, et cetera, and someone named Butt comes finds you later.
Yeah, for real. And I think I honestly think when you tie it back to Mitchell Warbell, right, who legitimately is tied into Nuggan Hand Bank as well, and they're
the Bay of Pigs situation,
100%. And also he's allegedly recruiting and domestically training Wayne Williams, who was later placed.
I love Mitch Warbell. He's one of my favorite characters.
Dude, he is a character. He looks like a cartoon character straight up. It's hilarious, honestly. But yeah, I just think that they were shifting money around to finance various covert operations all around the globe internationally. And if you can't see that for what it is, you're not paying attention, or you have yet to be overexposed to the reality of the, corroborated evidence that legitimately draws in all of this, just in terms of the direct and diabolical connections that seem to reveal the playbook that they utilize so very often. So it's just, that is the case, man. I mean, honestly, you're not only are
you are spot on, sir.
Air America,
you are on target.
But, man, civil air transport as well. That this is the name of the game. It's not one organization. It's an umbrella organization. And I think again, one is exposed, another probably multiple will prop up and
like a fucking Hydra, dude. You chop one head off, they grow two more.
Oh, don't start that, because the SLA used the Hydra, right? The seven-headed cobra. Get the fuck out of here. Like, Donald sink you to freeze. Like, come on now. You can't be, experimented on through MK Ultra at the exact same institution that Charles Manson was prior to your tenure, and then expect me to believe that story is all that it seems. So
you ain't kidding,
no
sir.
way.
You ain't kidding. And I appreciate all your time, Austin.
Course,
Wade Picard, and all of your details. You have a large volume of details, sir. And a man of your age, I highly respect your interest and ability to discuss and articulate these details. So that's awesome stuff, man. If I may close out this detail back to Fort Bragg. So would you believe in the Idaho 4 murders?
Man, he gets frozen right when he's getting into it. This is perfect, though. I think anytime I get the opportunity to come on and talk to JJ, I'm excited, honestly, just because. Are you back?
Am I back?
Yeah, I think you're back now. Yeah, what's up, buddy?
Would you believe butt-chugging champ, Sigma Kappa, University of Idaho chapter 1984, Coomer Scott Green? I make Muppets for all these people. That's a different Muppet, but I'll bring that Muppet up while I'm discussing this guy. So would you believe 4 hours after the 911 was called, so this is 12 hours after the alleged murders, 2 dudes show up from Moscow PD, the lead detective for the department, a fellow by the name of Blaker. He's now the captain. And a fellow by the name of Brett Payne. You're looking at Brett Payne right there. He's a rookie cop. And instead of the lead detective who showed up at the same time as him, they said, Brett Payne, you're the lead detective. And I would argue the reason why that is because not only is he a former paratrooper from Fort Bragg, he's currently a reserve military police officer in the U.S. Army with a top secret clearance. So I would argue this is a matter of national security, and he had the clearance in which to be the lead detective.
Wow. That makes sense to me. I think I'm very excited, honestly, to dig further into the that very interesting connection in terms of this new Idaho case. I was unaware, honestly, of the extraordinary layers that are involved. And I think that anytime you can kind of pinpoint a more relevant and current example of how this is, being facilitated before our eyes. That's why I thought the Delphi murders was such an interesting story, because it's very recent. And again, it's kind of a window into this very well-established clandestine network. And again, it's something that I think I refer to as modern Gladio, because I do think that is legitimately the time frame they've been working on. I mean, clearly it was prior to that, but I think it was so much more well-entrenched, post World War II. And
absolutely, dude. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then after the killing of the King death ritual in Dallas, I mean, in broad daylight, I think that definitely helped escalate the agenda in certain ways. I'm not saying that JFK was any sort of I'm not living in this sort of, naive reality, that I believe is very much, cartoonish in itself in terms of believing in one individual making any sort of real consequential change. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you can rise to that level of power without being compromised, or at least a part of, it
is the sad nature of our reality, is it not, sir?
Exactly. But yeah, I'm gonna.
Butt chugging's an actual thing, though. This is threatening the butts of fraternity members nationwide, not the less alumni of fraternities like Coomer Scott Green.
That's fucking. I love it.
Isn't that some wild stuff on the Idaho case there? Why we have these OJ connections, Manson family connections, U.S. Army intelligence connections. Brett Payne, the rookie detective, rookie cop who became detective at the most heinous murder scene in the state's history, because he's got a top secret clearance for matters of national security.
Yeah, man, that's what it looks like to me. I think this is, the CIA and the cult of intelligence, as it was described, right? But
for sure,
it really is more than just the CIA. I understand, but I do think that the cult of intelligence is just such a great descriptive term, and as far as how this operates, it's in this framework where you have to be able to pry back that veil of naivete and see through, to the deeper levels of sinister operations and understand the functionality of the standpoint of let's say just I would say the operational standpoint from the just very well established assets and operatives on the ground that seem to provide us with these extraordinary windows, into the structured playbook and the resurfacing tactics. And so, yeah, man, I just remain skeptical at all times, right? And no, dude, it wasn't Kool-Aid.
That's a great way to put it, dude.
It was Flavor Aid.
That's
JJ.
a great way to put it. You articulate these things very well.
I'm fucking with you. all the Jonestown nerds, they get super.
It's not
upset.
historically accurate, I understand, but
right.
But the Flavor Aid character is not nearly as comical.
Hey, the Kool-Aid. Yeah, I know, right? The Kool-Aid guy is definitely.
So I do want to close on this, and then we'll have to, perhaps we'll table this for our next discussion, sir. But this is the father of the alleged shooter in that firefighter incident, which seemed to be an anniversary of the burning down of the Hayden Lake compound. You'll notice the Satanic Bible, and let me bring you up his Nazi tattoos. Stand by. So he's got 1488 tattooed across his hand here in this photo.
Oh, shit.
I apologize, it's Children's in there, but I don't really care about Nazi Satanists. I apologize. That
right.
One.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's crazy, man.
So there you go, 1488, right?
Shit,
and this
man.
dude thinks he's a werewolf. And you might think that's strange, but there is a sect of the Temple of Set that has werewolf, Satanist werewolves and Satanist vampires. So he calls himself Wolf Voorhees.
Wow. I think it's
something
eerily
to consider for future conversations. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, no doubt. I just think it's eerily similar to that of the symbolic nature of the werewolf and gladio operatives, on the ground as well. I think that's very interesting.
Nazi werewolves, these guerrilla fighters behind the scenes that Michael Aquino washes the balls of.
Exactly.
He loves that shit.
I just think you look at some of these modern gladio scenarios, right, where it's very much just, tactics of destabilization and order out of chaos in a way, but it's just all too convenient and strategic to have this sort of symbolic nature involved when you clearly know the connotation. Yeah. So I'm not shocked at all, man. I mean, that fits perfectly.
Same old script, different day, sir. Well, I appreciate all your time and all your details, sir, because I listened to your show, I was getting new details and new tabs of research, same as the last time we spoke on our previous conversations, but I think I got more. You think you topped it all today with even more tabs.
Thank you, buddy.
I enjoy that very much.
I appreciate you. Honestly, I was saying when you got glitched out and you were frozen for a second, I just appreciate the opportunity, man, because again, anytime I've spoken to you, it's been a few times now. Like I've just, I've learned a lot, and I very much appreciate and value that. So I would love to, anytime you have the chance and you're willing and interested, I would love to have another conversation, because there's so much that we have yet to cover, even today. I just, the nature of this sort of clandestine playbook. So, but
we live in wild times, sir. We live in wild times. I appreciate the kind words, and I'm always happy to join you for a conversation. First of all, have I ever introduced you to my former stalker who wanted to be my PR rep real bad?
No, I don't
Buffalo
think so.
Jared Revisa. Yeah, he's a mind-controlled assassin with a multi-state stabbing spree. The guy he murdered hired him as his PR rep. That's Buffalo Jared Revisa, right down just around the corner from where they found Obama's chef drowned in that shallow pool there in
Oh my
Martha's
God.
Vineyard.
Wow.
He's allegedly, thankfully, he's allegedly in the Bridgewater State Mental Hospital in Massachusetts. Oops. That's the same mental hospital that let Nathaniel Barjona on the loose. So I don't have any trust in those folks. Plus, this is a horse of a different color, but yeah, that's Buffalo Jared. He's a colorful character, isn't he? His family, he's from a famous sports hypnotist family. They broke the curse of the GOAT for the Chicago Cubs.
Wow.
The 96-year-old sports curse from the the Revisa family, dude. That's the family business, dude.
No
this
way.
Dude on a multi-state stab. He was. I think he wanted to stab me and wear my skin as a human coat. But
dude, what the
Buffalo
hell?
Jared.
So fucking funny, but also terrifying.
Super terrifying, dude. I'm always watching my six. I don't know where this dude's at, man. His court cases in Connecticut, Massachusetts, not publicly available. Did a show a couple weeks. Folks of the interwebs want to check that one out. The Legends of Buffalo Jared Revisa.
My God, dude.
I'm concerned that folks at that mental hospital may be targeting me, dude. I don't know what's going on with that, but you know what I mean. I've never been there and I don't know those parts, but
keep your
it's
head
weird
on
that these characters go back there. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, for sure, buddy.
Well, Andy, I appreciate all your time, sir. Thanks again for joining me to get real GCD here tonight. I appreciate all the details. The chat also seems to have very, very much enjoyed the conversation as well. So that's awesome.
Hell yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, buddy, let's get another one scheduled anytime for sure. I appreciate you as always. I think he got. I think we lost JJ again. Whenever he comes back, we're gonna have to act. There he is.
My back.
Yeah, buddy. What's up? Yeah, again, you already know. Let's get another one scheduled as soon as possible, and I appreciate you as always, brother.
Yes, sir. Will do, and I appreciate your time and all the details. Absolutely, and definitely like where your head's at in a lot of these topics, and look forward to the next conversation. And folks of the interwebs can check out Operation GCD Thursdays tomorrow at 9 p.m., possibly today at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Times. For Michael Aquino and another one of Colby's queers in his satanic panic in his Operation Psyops to Mind War, been unpacking the details of that in his own statements compared to his own statements. So this ain't my words.
Of victory. Am I right?
Dude, we're under these measures of Michael Aquino today. We just don't realize it.
Yes, sir. Agreed.
Appreciate your time. Appreciate the folks of the interwebs, and catch you next time.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, but check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.